We'll be starting in 3 minutes at the top of the hour, 10 o'clock. Hello, dumpster fire. You might have to identify yourselves if you want me to know which students you are. I'm looking forward to all of your names. We'll also see how many people actually tune in to watch this because a lot of people are doing the contest right now, so this will just serve as a recording for lecture, which is completely fine. But if we get a lot of people talking back and forth, then I'll do stuff with you. That jump scared me. Oh, the fact that I was talking over this. Sorry. Well, don't worry. If your internet is ass, then this is all recorded anyway, and so you can always play it back. I have a little bit of latency on just so that it's more forgiving for my internet, so it won't be 100% one-to-one live. There'll be a small delay. Yes. Should I have put a little puppet mouth on my logo there so that it talks when I talk? That'd be fun. Hello. All right, let's just go ahead and hop into it then. So, welcome everybody. I know that today is going to be a little bit weird because half of you are going to be doing the contest and half of you are here. I have downloaded all of the work that was in the homework folder here. So I've got Jacob, Kayla, Luke, Nick, Sasha, and Susie's work here. If you're uploading something right now, I wish you weren't. I wish you'd done it before because now it's going to be a little bit awkward, but just throw it in there and pop it in chat if that's the case. And I can download it and put it into the proper folder so I can do the review of everything. Some of these have play blasts, but rather than watching those play blasts today, I'm just going to look at the files themselves and play them back in Maya because I think that that's going to be a more effective way to do the review. All right, so this is Jacob's that I've opened up here. Let's go ahead and play this. And I think that looks pretty solid for a first go. Yeah, pretty solid. I unmuted the ground controller so that I'd get an on-the-spot walk because it was set to off-the-spot initially. But this looks pretty solid. The only thing I'll say that I can see right off that I don't like is the fact that the feet are so far apart from each other right now. He's kind of walking a little bit more masculine, a little bit more like a cowboy or a sailor because those steps are so far apart. So I would say slide those feet together to where the insteps or the big toe just about touch each other, and that would be a little bit closer to a natural walk so that the feet are like side by side. It'll create a slight V in the body rather than them being over their own hips. Like if you stand up and try to walk with your feet underneath your hips, then it's going to feel a little bit weird. Another weird thing that's happening from this angle, and I know we mostly concentrate on this angle typically, But just because now that I'm looking, I can see that the knee controllers are also in their default location. We get a little inward knee tucking on some of these steps like this right here, which is a little bit odd as well. It feels kind of bad, like there's some tension inward on the thighs, but not on the legs. And it's giving it some character that's unintentional. So just be careful about that. Do look at this angle. The only angle we pretty much never look at is this one up here. Although some games you might have top-down view, an orthographic, something like this, where this view becomes important, but that's the only one we typically don't look at all. So real quick, I'm just going to grab the hips. Good morning, Luke. And I'm going to take a look in the graph editor just to see what we got in here. So generally that looks pretty good to me. And the incoming and outgoing tangents are something I'm going to focus on because that's where the cycle occurs. So sometimes in order to facilitate this, I'll leave the infinity turned on. So just viewing the infinity like this doesn't make it cycle in any particular way. You just end up seeing what the line is doing, and the default infinity is set to constant. So what we should do, just so I can view that, is grab everything and then tell all of these to cycle, post-infinity cycle, and pre-infinity cycle, so that both sides of this cycle are visible. We can see what the previous line was doing, and we can see what the line is doing right at the end of the cycle as well. And that'll help us to form a better cycle. We're not actually using this space out here. Our timeline, in other words, is not going out into the frames beyond 30 or before 1. But it does help visually for us to understand what's happening in the cycle. So now if I grab the hips here, we can see if I do translate Z, oh, why isn't it doing it? I thought I had grabbed everything. Huh. That's weird. It's doing it on this channel. Oh, maybe I had specified by accident. Let's see if I can do that again. Grab everything. Looks like most of it's doing it properly. Grab everything again. Post-infinity cycle. Pre-infinity cycle. I saw some more stuff pop up that time. Well, let's find out. Oh, this is... Oh, cycle, yeah, cycle without offset, right? So in this case, the only one that's going to look kind of weird is this translate Z, where cycle with offset would continue going from the point that we left off, which would be correct if we were actually using cycling here. But in this case, it just resets over point, 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 point. Do you not see the graph editor on screen right now? You should be able to see it on screen, just to make sure everything's working out properly. I can see it on my preview thumbnail, so hopefully that's not something that's happening. But here in Translate Y, where we're cycling over and over again, we're starting and ending from the same point because that's very important for this. We can see what's happening through that transition, and if you get a little ugliness like this, that's something that we oftentimes want to fix. Okay. I just see my tangents to one of the presets in Pray. Oh yeah, okay. Well, we can do better than that. We're in a class for a reason. So if I wanted to fix this here, so this suggests that there's a little hiccup, a little hitch every time the character goes back to that original contact. We may or we may not see that because it's pretty subtle. In fact, I don't really see it at all, so it doesn't really represent a problem here. But I'm going to show you how to solve it anyway, just in case, a couple different ways. For one, I can grab either side's tangent handles like this one over here, and I can adjust it until it looks good on both sides, right? So it looks good going through here. Or I could be adjusting this one, so if I made it go too far, now it's got a little corner, and I could set it back, and now it's looking very nice. The other way to do this, which is a little bit more slick to do it this way, set these both to just flat, and then grab the right hand handle for both of them. And now when you move one, you move both of them. See how they're still attached like that? So whatever I do on one side, I'm doing to the other side. And that makes it very easy to get a nice smooth flow through the cycle like that. So that's oftentimes what I'll do, is just set my start and end position to flat and unified. grab the right hand handle for both of them, just holding shift. And then when I move one, it moves both, and I get a nice smooth pass through the initial pose like that. So Jacob, this looks fine. There's a little bit here that I could see needs a bit more care like that one, but visually everything's completely fine, and that's what really matters for us. Here's the translate X graph. The in and out tangents look fantastic. Remember, this is the left and right of the character. This looks a bit weird that we're kind of wobbling through here, but we don't need all of these keys. So we don't necessarily need this one or this one. This one maybe, although we kind of don't also. And then it's kind of hanging out for a few frames at the extreme on both sides. I didn't notice that happening, but now that I see that, I want to check. And you know what? It looks okay. It means that it's hitting a wall and sliding up and down that wall on both sides. But it's so subtle that I don't see it happening. So I think that you're getting away with it in this case. That's not necessarily the choice I would normally make. I would normally choose which one of these is going to be the extreme, which is not, and then soften it by moving one of them down a little bit so we're hanging out at that apex, but we're not locked to that apex. So we could soften it by moving this one down. So now we're very near, or maybe like right here, we're very near that apex, but we're not stuck to it. Like that. I just find that to be a little bit more elegant than snapping to it. But really, in more cartoony instances, we might do something like this and snap directly to an extreme like that. Also, if you do just get rid of these in the middle here, it doesn't affect any of your other keyframes, right? They still have keys if you put them on there. It's only for this one channel, so we don't necessarily need that one, for instance. And if you did want to just hold on those extremes, we can do something like that. If I play this back, we hopefully should see almost no difference. Yeah. So sometimes preferable, although really, if you're doing that just to like clean house, we're kind of wasting effort there. It's taking too long to do those little edits when they're not going to matter in the end. So don't worry too much about it. Okay. Let's go through and look at these poses then. So we've got our contact pose. I will say, your pace is very wide with this. A person walking down the street with their legs that far apart is doing some sort of power walking thing. So probably bring those a bit closer together so that they're a bit more casual. Down is a bit subtle as well. I would kind of expect the hips to drop a bit more than that. But I think in this case, it's not to do with your pose. It's to do with the fact that your pace was so wide to begin with. So our hips are already lower to the ground, and they can't get a whole lot lower than that. And so there's not really anywhere to go. Feet are looking okay, though. We're going to the passing position. I would raise this up to where the leg is not so crunched together. You can go to a nearly straight leg, but I wouldn't go to a flat straight leg because that ends up looking unnatural. Like, try not to lock the limbs very much. Our up pose doesn't quite look extreme enough either. I would bring it up at least to here where the leg does almost completely straighten, or this would be one of the few where you can get it almost completely flat straight like that. I kind of avoid that. I don't like how it looks. I don't like how it feels. So I tend to keep it a little bit more subtle like this or this, but you started all the way down here, which looks a bit weak. And then we've got that wide pose again. Checking for any inconsistencies in this side, and they all look pretty consistent. I think you did the same thing for the left and the right step because I don't see any limping. So what will happen if you have a asymmetric walk, so one step is different from the other, is you'll notice a limp. The character will step high on one step and not the other, or step low on one step and not the other, or lean to one side or another side. I'm not seeing any of that happening, so I think we're generally okay. Yep, just watching that happen. And then let me take a look at the feet in particular. You're snapping the ball of the foot down to the ground here in the front, which is great. And then the toes follow, which gives it a little bit more life than just going all the way from frame 1 to frame 4. Peeling off the ground with the blue foot looks nice as well. Yep, and the set down with the blue foot looks pretty good as well. All right, so overall pretty decent. This looks competent, very good. no problem here. Little tweaks and fixes, that's it. So very good job, Jacob. I'm going to go ahead and open the next one, which is Kayla. No problem, Jacob. If you have any questions, you guys can go ahead and put them in chat. I do have it open on my other screen. You guys can't see the setup, but I got 2 monitors, one on the left, one on the right. You guys are on the right one, so all the chat is open over there, and I can see what you're typing as I do this. Okay, something weird going on here for Kayla. In particular, I don't know where the ground controller went, and it kind of looks like the character is sliding around or something on the grid. So I got to get to the bottom of that. And I can also see that there are many, many different control layers over here, only one of which seems to do anything. Oh no, they all do something. All right, well, I'll leave them all on. I'm just not sure why we've got all the duplicates. I'm just going to check in the reference editor real quick. There is only one reference of Goon, so that's fine. There are some groups here that have been created somehow. They don't seem to be doing anything. And since this is referenced, I shouldn't be able to harm your work by deleting them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and see what happens. Or I might crash Maya. Okay, nope, it looked like it worked. Okay, so I got rid of a bunch of those groups, and it's still fine. I don't think it changed the playback, at least from what I can see. Kayla, I think you're probably hitting the hotkey for creating group, Control G somehow. So just beware of that because we're getting a lot of weird things happening there. Now, as far as where the controller for the ground went, it must be hidden because I don't think you can delete it. So if I look in here real quick, maybe I can find it. Here's the root control, visibility on. Okay. Are you out here somewhere? Where did you go? Let's see. There's a bunch of stuff in here that we're not seeing at all because, oh, I'm not seeing the waist controller either. Okay, maybe this was a show thing. Ah, okay, Nerds Curves was just turned off. And these ones aren't. Okay, I forgot about that. These are actually polygons, these controls here. There's a way that you can display polygons as wireframes as controls, and I just forgot that that's the case. So, okay. So that's nothing you did, Kayla. Don't worry about that. That's just me being senile and not realizing how that works. Okay, so I'm going to check first this ground controller because I was seeing some weird action happening. But it all looks pretty solid here. I can see that the translate Z is moving forward linearly, just like it should. And nothing else appeared to be happening, which is great. So what is it that I'm seeing? I think, okay. It's about how the feet are using their internal channels, these heel, ball, toe channels, I think. So if I look on frame 0 for our contact, we've got a heel off the ground. So here's the heel roll. We've got some toe, which just wiggles the toe, and all of that's fine. Yeah, all that's fine. When we go to frame 4, your down pose, every channel has something happening, and that's bad because I think that we're counter animating. So the toe wiggle, it should be at 0 to be flat, but it's not at 0. So if I 0 it, I see it lift up into the air, and that's puzzling. And then I have toe roll, which is this kind of rotation, but we're supposed to be flat on the ground. So that should be 0. Then I've got ball roll, which is this one. And if we're flat on the ground, that one should be 0. And now I can see that we've got heel roll still engaged. And all of those other channels were to counter that effect. And now we're under the ground. Okay, so when you're getting a nice flat pose for your foot, it can be a lot simpler than what you were doing. I think you were fighting against the rig and achieving your pose in a roundabout complex way where really it should just be flatten all of these, make sure your rotates are still flat on the ground. That doesn't include this one, by the way. We can have an angle for the foot and still safely get good contact on the ground. And then making sure that we're actually positioned on the grid like this instead. But if I fix all that now and then I play forward, I think we're going to get weird things happening. So I'm going to have to undo back to how you had it to assess your animation. But just know that that's really the answer, is that we shouldn't be achieving our poses with this kind of complex posing on the internal channels of the foot. So it's creating some weird, like what I noticed when I first played it back, we'll see if you guys can see it too, is that something felt in the feet like they were slipping or bouncing or something like that. They didn't feel solidly locked to the ground. It's pretty subtle, and the frame rate of this live stream might affect it as well. But it was present enough that I clocked it immediately and was looking for an explanation immediately. So your audience may or may not be that sensitive to it. I don't know. But it was definitely a functional problem about how we were posing this. So let's look at the poses themselves rather than nitpicking how you got there. This contact pose, I will say, the back leg should not be perfectly straight like that. The back leg should be subtly bent. We want a V shape in the thighs, so the thigh is still reaching backwards, but we always want a little bit of subtle bend in the knee unless it is a reaching pose. So for the front of this contact, this leg is reaching without any stress towards the next point it's going to rest on. So we generally straighten that out. And then the one other time we tend to straighten the leg out is in the up pose with the supporting leg, just because we're going to tip on that down towards our contact. But I also don't straighten this one entirely. I think it's weird to straighten it 100%. So you need a little bit of subtle bend in that back leg, which will lessen the stride. I think the stride should be more like this. And it looks like I actually can, because the stretch of the leg was accommodating for that. So if I move it back, we still have a pretty straight leg all the way to here. So I think something like this would be a bit more appropriate. We don't want to wildly reach outside of like the bounds of this circle, generally, if we're doing a normal kind of walk. I have, by the way, auto key turned off. So if I make these changes and then I start scrubbing the timeline again, none of this is going to be saved. So in case you guys are confused about what's happening there. We have a down pose, and we're encountering some more of that weirdness where pivoting off the ground didn't work properly. Our toes should still be in contact with the last position that it was in on frame 0, I guess. I don't know why you're on frame 0 instead of frame 1. I thought mine started on frame 1, but whatever. It should still be in the same position and pivoting from this toe area. So the way I usually would achieve that is by copying the position on frame 1 and pasting it here, and then just using toe roll to pivot upward, right? So it means this is going to stay put, and the next transition from 4 to 7, so from the down pose to the passing pose, is going to be a little bit weirder because it's going to travel through air in a very strange way. The diamond is going to kind of leap over to a new position because now we are going to be rotating it based on this diamond. But since it's in midair, we really don't catch most of that, and we could just do a couple extra poses on 5 and 6 to fix any weirdness. So that's what we should do, and then we get into midair where now you are still using the internal channels to pose this foot, but now you could zero all those out, except for toe if you want the toe to flex. Let's just do these. So now we can zero all those out, and we can actually rotate and position this freely in midair, and that's completely fine. You could, though, continue doing it this way, but I find that the way that it interpolates between this keyframe and this one tends to look a little strange. Though in your case, it actually looks fine. We just want to make sure that we achieve that last pose the correct way. So you could keep using the internal channels if you want to and never rotate the diamonds. I just kind of prefer to rotate the diamonds while it's in midair and then return back to a flat position when I hit the ground again. So That's just me. I've seen other animators do it a different way. There's not necessarily a right or wrong there. And we can see more of the non-contact problem happening there if we get really close down like this. Let's look at so that's the passing pose. Passing can come a little closer up to straight as well. And remember that the reason it's called the passing pose is because this leg is passing the other leg. So we want to get the ankle a little bit closer to center because this one is now passing the supporting leg. That's why we call it that. The up pose, and we can put the unsupported leg a little bit further out, a little bit more out, like in this direction, maybe not so high. You can keep it nearer to the ground, but out in front of the other leg. And then our contact pose. This one actually looks more correct than your first one. So the contact that you've got on 15 is a bit closer to what I would want. The only thing I would say is that this thigh is reaching forward rather than backward, which I try to avoid. So if you wanted to fix that, then you need to grab the hips and the front leg and the knees and drag them all out a little bit like this. Now that does create a wide stance like that, and that's because I would probably have it higher up as well. Let me see if I can get this right. So here's where you are, or maybe lowering this would be the key. Yeah, maybe a little bit higher up and further forward like that. And now our stance isn't quite as wide. This looks hyperextended though. Yeah, this is hyperextended. I don't know why that one's so hyperextended. So anyway, just trying to get it so that your thigh doesn't do this. Oh, I know. Oh, okay. It's because of how much rotation you've got on the hips. You're rotating probably too much. That's a big swish on those hips. I haven't been looking at it from that angle. Oh yeah, okay. So not only is the animation playing back with a little bit of a hitch there, but it's also rotating too much, I think. So we're getting a very extreme angle. Let's take a look at that. So that would be rotate Y. Yeah, so there's some weird stuff happening right here in the graph editor, some tangents that aren't lining up. And from earlier, when we turned on our infinity and then set all of our curves to cycling, you could see that the start and end poses do not flow into each other. So it's actually bouncing and then swooshing and then bouncing every start and end of the playback, which is why we're getting that. You can see when our playhead hits the end of the timeline, that's when that little flicker kind of happens. So you might have gotten confused about how we were posing that specifically. Let me see if I can figure out what should it be doing. So we're on our down pose, we're on one extreme. We're on our down pose, we're on our other extreme. And then we've got this third extreme. It's this one that needs to go. That one shouldn't exist. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this. I'll assume that 0 for the contacts. It would actually be more like the passing position where we would get that 0, but we can leave that there. I'm just going to simplify this whole thing like that. Set these two to flat, and then set these two to flat like I did before, and grab only the right-hand side controllers and angle both of them. Whoa. Okay, that trick isn't working this time. I'm not sure why, but I'm just going to make it work correctly. Maybe slightly asymmetrical, but there we go. That should at least look like we're rotating back and forth consistently. Now, I also said that I think it's too much. So we could either come in here to each one of the extremes and drag them up towards 0 and check what's happening in the Maya window while we do it. So here's our perspective window. This is how far we're rotated. I can move this down to check back towards 0. Or I can scale. So if I grab the whole line, hit my scale tool, and start my middle mouse drag from the middle, I'm holding shift, middle mouse dragging only vertically. This is going to make the entire animation less extreme or more extreme, which is the trick I normally like to use. I'm on frame 4 so I can see how far it rotates. And right about here at like 10 degrees is, I think that's still pretty significant, but it looks a lot more subtle to me. So I would do something like that. Let's see how far that hip moves now. Actually, maybe that was too far. Now it looks like the hip doesn't really swivel at all. So maybe I went too far. I'm going to undo that. Let's see, you were originally at 30. So if I bring it down to 20 or 15, 15 would be half. So let's bring it to like 20 and see if that feels better. 20 is still pretty significant. I think that feels good. I can now see it. It's reaching. Again, this kind of change is going to mess up whether or not your legs were straight. So keep that in mind. But I would recommend toning that one down a bit. Okay. Just watching the playback, the character kind of looks like they're trudging, as in their weight is consistently forward rather than evenly distributed on their feet. Yeah, I'm not quite seeing where that's happening. That might be just consistently throughout, or it may be because you've got a straighter back leg than I would prefer, that it starts to look like trudging a little bit. And also I was noticing that the hips aren't bouncing up and down hardly at all. Oops, sorry, I meant to zoom out. So if I put my mouse here, we can see they're bouncing maybe 1/8 of the ball's width, and I think it should be closer to like 1/4 to 1/2, something like that. Actually, that might be way too extreme now that I heard myself say that. But so I'm looking at the graph editor. It looks a little bit rough here, but I think that the amount that we're moving, if we look at the numbers, is, where's 0? Why is this all in? Okay, did I grab the right thing? Yeah, those are the hips. Oh, I must have grabbed the wrong thing. No, I didn't. This is very strange. I've got negative 3.8 here instead of positive. Why are we in the negative? Why aren't we in the negatives? Did I really make this rig do that and never noticed? Or did you flip something upside down? Am I upside down right now? I'm not. Y is facing that way. Okay, that's very strange. I thought that the space that this was in was wholly positive. Weird. Don't know. Anyway, the amount of distance that we're covering, so this middle here, which is not centered around 0, is something like 4.5, 5, something like that. And then we get to like 3.8, so like 4.8 to 3.8, and all the way down here 5.8. We're only moving like 2 units total, which is not that much if you look at the grid. Those units, right? We're moving this far for our entire bounce up and down with a walk. Maybe for a very realistic walk that would make sense, but for something like this, in particular, a down pose needs to significantly dip. We got to be able to see that drop. The passing pose should be about the same as our contacts. It can be in the ballpark. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. And then our up pose, we need to raise up enough. And that would mean flexing this more on ball so that we could get it higher up. You may just be a little bit high overall for your initial pose. Dropping this down a little bit to get some flexed legs can help. But then we can get that really, really wide kind of like trudging walk again. So be careful. It's all a subtle balance to get all these poses just right. But yeah, I think more bouncing up and down in the body is what I'm looking for. So Luke checked and he says it's also negative. Wow, I just never noticed that. I've been using this rig for years and just never saw that we were in the negative somehow for translate Y. I wonder if it's something I did or if it was on the original Goon rig. Well, later on, we're going to pose full body poses with the original Goon rig so I can look then. But yeah, that just kind of freaked me out. Anyway, Kayla, there you go. I think that's enough stuff to fix for now. Generally looking okay. You got the legs together, which is nice. Good posing there. Want to fix some of that stuff, particularly in the feet, how you were achieving those poses, and then addressing some of the hip stuff as well. Don't worry about any knee things until you figure out those 2 big parts, because they'll change everything with how the knees look, whether or not they snap together suddenly. So knee popping is like right here, really big. Knee popping, I don't know if we covered this concept, is when the knee goes from a straight position to a bent position really rapidly, like in one frame. It's a problem. It creates a flicker visually in animation. We want to avoid it, but it's not a problem to obsess over until the feet look great and the hips look great, and then we can subtly adjust it. All right, very good. Thank you. Next, we've got Luke. Luke, I saw you had a corrupted one and a not corrupted one. I chose the not corrupted one. I don't know what was going on there, but it seemed bad. Cool. This looks pretty solid from first glance. This looks maybe a little bit feminine from the front. I think it's how smooth and how subtle it is. Or it could be a part of how much it's rotating left and right. Maybe tone it down just slightly, but it's not like full female feminine. It's just a little tiny bit. Okay, very good. Let's take a look at individual pieces. So taking a look at our translate Y, that looks good and smooth. It looks properly posed out. Our translate Z going nice and steady. Our translate X has a little bit of a weird thing that on the start and end of the cycle, it's pausing in the middle, then going to its extreme, then smoothly flowing through, and then rapidly pausing on its extreme again. So let's see if we can catch that now that I've seen it. You know, it's so subtle. That was translate X that I really don't see it at all. Ah, okay. And that's because the distance we're covering is half a unit. So it's a very, very small motion, like this much. So we're really not going to notice that necessarily. But it could cause a problem. So I would fix it just by grabbing those two and setting them to linear. Would probably do it. Like that's enough to get rid of the problem because the problem is so small. So whether or not that had any significant impact, I can't say. But on each of our down poses, our hips should translate a little bit more over the supporting leg. This could make it feel even more feminine, unfortunately. So since we've already kind of leaned that direction as far as gender is concerned here, maybe in your case, don't do it. But generally, I would want to translate that over the supporting leg to get a little bit more dynamic action in the body. And then if you were doing like a cowboy or a sailor or a really masculine walk, do that a lot more and do the rotation less. So less of this and more of this would skew it more masculine. So now that I'm saying that out loud, I'm hearing myself saying like, this is going to make it more feminine. No, that should do the opposite. It should give it more of that masculinity back again, I think. Richard William gender walk moment. I mean, it's worthwhile to know what makes the difference so that you can blend and put that into different characters. But yeah, I did always like his anecdote about the smooth walking person gliding past a wall as a way to be aware of that stuff. Perhaps a little bit more up and down also. I think it's a little bit too smooth, and that could be adding to the femininity as well. You're doing it enough, I think, here, but it's maybe gliding a little as well. Let's look at the feet. So your front foot is kind of just doing the pose to pose. It's not really snapping down to the ground. There's no real weight being put on the foot because there's no intermediary positions. So what I recommend is that on frame 2, we zero out the heel roll and we increase the, not the toe roll, the toe, like this, so that the foot snaps down to the ground, but there is some overlapping action. Then in the next pose, zero everything, so we are flat and locked, so that we get a snappier and more dynamic transition from this pose to this pose. We peel off the ground. So you also maybe peeled off the ground too soon. Let me see. So we've got this one, which looks completely good. And then this one, which I think that is fine so long as on 19, we don't stick our toe in the ground. We pivot right from that same spot. So you can use, since I'm doing off the spot right or on the spot right now, and this is translating backward. We can't see where in real space this would have gone, but you can use this curve as a reference point. So here on the pose, the toe is just inside this curve. So we would want to move this back to there to feel like it's pivoting from the same point and put a keyframe there. And then the rest of it should be just flowing through the air up to this point, so long as we don't scoop down into the ground again. So just be careful about that. Then we are going in front of the body. We do have two keyframes, one right next to the other. I'm not sure if that was a mistake. It looks like maybe it was. In the graph editor, we've got just one keyframe on either one of these channels that are kind of transposed a little bit. Try generally to keep those together. If this was in the polish phase, that's not really a problem, and it looked better, but I try to keep it neat and tidy until I'm all the way in the polish phase, so it's easier to edit my poses. And then we're hitting this, which is fine. That's maybe a little bit bland as well. I think what we did is somewhere out here I was sticking the foot close to the end but flexing it down like this, so then in the next couple frames it reversed itself in more of a flop. That can give it a little bit of character as well. So consider something like that, but if it looks too silly, then don't do it. Okay, blue foot looks very similar to the red. No real problems there. Knee controllers are staying in front the entire time. Looks pretty good. All right. Thank you, Luke. Nick. Continue. Okay. Oh, what happened to the texture? It's all gone. Huh. And there's some weird geometry sticking out of the butt there. Nick, what happened to your rig? Let me just see. Is it referenced? It's referenced. Okay. So you couldn't have destroyed it. I wonder what happened. Yeah, we'll talk more about gender differences as far as like posing full body goes. That's probably better to do in person when we're back in the classroom because it's easier to pantomime. But there are reasons why women swing the hips more because it is using your spine's flexibility differently, generally so that you don't sway the boobs around like crazy because that could hurt. And men tend to twist the upper body more because we don't care about that sort of thing. It creates a more manly effect to kind of like have the shoulders moving through space more rather than less. So whereas if you're looking at someone very feminine, they tend to glide, and someone more masculine tends to bob back and forth like that. And then, of course, the reality of having equipment between your legs means your legs have to be parted somewhat to walk comfortably. And if you cross your legs over, you pinch that stuff and it hurts. So keep that in mind as well. I'm sure there's a whole big wide world of nuance there that I'm not aware of, but just the generalities are kind of the sliders that you use for a character. All right, let me turn this. Uh-oh, you didn't do the on-the-spot thing. I want you to. So Nick, I want you to know how to do that trick for counter animating this backwards smoothly so that you have an on-the-spot walk in case you have to make cycles really conveniently. It is far less convenient, in my experience, to animate these hitting the ground and then traveling backward. Wait, what's going on? I can't see my manipulators. Did you turn the manipulators off? Oh, you did. Huh. What else did you turn off? Rigging and animation stuff. Well, that's fine. That shouldn't matter. That's weird. Are we using smooth shade all, flat shade all? No, that should be okay. Okay, I was trying to figure out why it looked weird. But yeah, I want you to know how to do that counter animating thing because it's a lot more convenient to look at in general. I do see one keyframe, but yeah, I just don't see the second one. So if you don't remember, the trick was we try to leave this right and 0 on translate Z on frame 1. Frame the whole rest of the pose around that. So the only thing you don't want to do is move this Because if you have to do that, then you have to do math, and we'll try to avoid doing some math. Then as far as this traveled by the last frame, so 25.888, I'm going to copy that. I would paste that in translate Z for my ground controller and then make it negative, and then key that, and then make it linear so that we're dragging the whole thing back at the same rate that it's moving forward, and we end up with a nice on-the-spot walk. I'm not going to do it now. I'm just going to leave it the way that you have it, but a really good thing to do. We don't judge if people are gay or straight based on Richard Williams. He's a product of his time. All right, generally looking pretty good though. This looks dynamic from the front. I like the amount of rotation we have. I think that we could use more translation, I think. Maybe just a little bit more, maybe, but keeping it subtle is good. That keeps it naturalistic. The amount of bobbing up and down feels very slight. I would like more up and down. Let me see on what poses in particular. Your contact looks pretty good. I think maybe the legs are just a little bit wide. The down feels okay. Passing, we snapped. I don't know if you guys saw that. Snapped from bent to straight all in one frame there. That's a knee pop as well. It's a more subtle one to catch than the outward one, but it's a knee pop as well. We want to try to avoid that. And try to not get a perfectly straight leg on this passing unless we're doing a very cartoony kind of walk. And then I don't see... Oh, there's the up pose. The up pose... I think they're all fine. It's just like the range of motion is a little bit narrow for my taste. And then we come back to passing again. So I'm going to use this knee pop as an example, though, of if we were completely happy with the hips and the feet, and we wanted to get rid of that knee pop, what do? This is where we actually do use this bottom square right here. And we would use the stretch. So the stretch channel right here that we haven't really touched will make the leg longer or shorter, right? And it will even detach it from the ankle, so the auto stretch will no longer work properly if you do this wrong. But what we would do is I'd go back to a frame where it looked fine. So frame 6, it looked fine. And I would key 0 stretch. Then I would come forward to where I got this knee pop. And I'm going to hold down Control as a middle mouse drag because that makes this slower. It makes it slighter. And I would increase the stretch of this leg just to where I stop being completely flat again. So now just 0.01, I've stretched out just a tiny bit to where it's not popping to perfectly straight. I'm going to key that. And then on your actual pose, you did get it straight and kept it straight. So I'm going to leave it like that. So we're just easing into a straight angle rather than popping to a straight angle. Okay, so hopefully, although it's happening quickly, it's less violent now and less likely to draw attention or feel like something in the anatomy snapped suddenly. Yeah, we really, I was advising people to just not touch this at all because it was likely your first pass on posing this walk was going to have problems that are bigger than that. In fact, if I'm going to go back and change the posing on my foot or my hips, I kind of just delete all of the work that I've done on this controller, bring it all back to defaults before I do that work, and then go back and redo any necessary work because this is really polishing and fixing, not a part of the character pose. So just keep that in mind. Although there are parameters in here that are important, like having the eye cage turned on and having the auto stretch turned on that we don't mess with. This stretch itself is really just for polishing something and not really for making your pose itself. Okay, but as a good example of how to fix that problem, that's what we would do. And the opposite would be true for the knee pop where it pops out, is that we would go to negative stretch. So we would shrink it a little bit so that it straightens a bit more at first before it gradually bends out. Cool. Something looked weird over there. Let me see. Probably going too crazy with that amount of toe bend there. And then just like I was talking about with Luke, get that thing to snap down to the ground flat and then flatten out the toes so that we have more snappiness, more punchiness with placing down on the ground, because it looks like we're treading through soft mud or something with that amount of transition. We're stepping on something soft there. You can, by the way, it's not always true that we snap our feet to the ground. If a character is trying to be sneaky, then they will place their foot out and then gradually lower it down to the ground. But they're using a lot of muscle control to do that. So if you do have a sneaky character, don't snap their feet to the ground like how I'm suggesting. Do allow them to ease themselves in, but think about how they're doing it. And then they'll also transfer their weight, not in a smooth way like this, but they'll hold it back and then transfer their weight late as well. Cool. Okay. Generally looking pretty good. Generally looking under control. Just a few little tweaks and bits and bobs to kind of tune in. I do see one, or maybe that was just because I was moving my camera. I was actually catching sight of this halo on the top and thought I saw a little hitch left and right, but I think it was because your walk keeps going back to that other position. I'm just going to check really quick the rotates on the hips. I might have been seeing something there. That one looks fine. This one has a weird little bump. So that one would be the one that I would have been noticing. Rotate Z. So yeah, it might have been that one right there. That's the only one that looks out of place. Yeah, that was it. It was a little wobble right there. So on frame 11, let's just get rid of that. There we go. We're back to being a little bit smoother. I'm not sure what was happening there. You might have been trying to fix some leg issue or something by moving the rotate of the hips. You didn't check the graph? Yeah, I spend a lot of time in the graph editor towards the end of an animation. Towards the beginning, I hardly even look at it. I might not even have it open. I'll just pose the character out, make it look as nice as I can, hop into the graph editor maybe to solve gimbal lock problems if the poses are dynamic enough. But then all the way through doing breakdowns, I might not even look in there until the polish phase, and then I spend a lot of time in the graph making things play back smoothly. All right, very good. Thank you. Sasha. I don't know if Sasha's here or not. You guys all have funny names, and I can't recognize anyone except for Christina and Luke, who have their own names. But let's see how this went. Okay. So the first thing that jumps out at me, good putting the feet closer together. The first thing that jumps out at me is that the hips are almost rooted to the spot. So I don't see enough up and down or left and right. So that would be translate X and translate Y. I'm not seeing enough. It looks like they're being held by invisible clamps and that their legs are kind of just dangling underneath them right now. So let's get more of that in both directions. So it would be translating over the supporting legs here, and especially the up and down as we go to each of those poses. Let's take a look. Here's a contact. That looks just about right. Here's a down. How far did we go? We went 0.3 units, a pretty small amount. I think that as you were going through the cycle, you were getting the idea that we have to drop a bit further, but we're still only going like half a unit down. So what I'm doing is saying like this is almost 0.49 or 4.9. This is 0.54, so that's about 0.5 total from the middle to the extreme. It's like half a unit, which if we look on our grid, it's a teeny tiny amount. So we do have to drop more than that. I would say this far seems like maybe a lot. Maybe we started too low. Let's see, how far did I move it? I moved it the equivalent of like a whole unit. So I went to like negative 5.6 or 5.5 or so. So at least a whole unit down. Then if we make it a whole unit above the unit or the 0 point, the contact point up, then we're going 2 units total. And that's still pretty small, right? It's like about the size of these toes, but it's going to be significant enough to feel like there's some good weight transfer, I think. So some of what's limiting you going up might be how subtle the amount of ball roll. So we can get that up to, here before it starts to feel significant. And then when we're up here, the ball roll can go all the way up to like here and still be realistic to what a human being could do. Like if you look at sports playbacks of someone reversing rapidly in football or basketball or something like that, they can really crank those toes in that ball area up quite a lot. This is still not feeling like a broken foot. I would even say going as far as here momentarily is possible for a human being, not the ankle part. Don't pay attention to that, just the ball part. Is possible momentarily as long as we snap back to something more comfortable very quickly. But yeah, get more dynamic range of motion in that foot. Then you did dip down into the grid down here. So make sure that, so that is our passing. Here's our contact. Like I was saying earlier, getting this pose is probably better achieved by leaving it where it was and using the toe roll to hinge off the ground and doing this free floating bit as the next part. Okay, so you're going just a little bit too early into the free floating foot. Leave that for the passing position, not for the down position. I think you'll get better results that way. As you're traveling through space, use the toe as overlap, just a little bit. I used to do it way too much, and it looked like all of my characters had clown feet. They would have big floppy feet that would overreact to everything. In fact, I used to do it for the wrists of a character and for the toes of a character, so they looked like they were really clowning it up all the time when they were doing their stuff, and I learned to be a lot more subtle with it. In particular here, it just looks too stiff to have it perfectly straight. So even a little bit like this much gives the foot some flexibility. And remember in this passing pose that the place where the foot's coming from is back here. So you can definitely angle this a lot further back if you want to. But it would be more realistic to have it forward like this and very close to the ground. People walk in a very, very efficient, very subtle way. Our feet probably more realistically are like this down towards the ground. But since this is a very big cartoony character, just be aware that you can angle it backward even, and that could be fine for a run or something, a much more dynamic motion. Having it all the way backward with toe trailing behind is definitely something we can do. You are dipping through the ground also right here at the very end before we hit that contact as well, so be aware of that. And in general, I would assume whenever I find a problem on one side, I would assume that problem probably exists on the other side for the mirrored angles, and indeed I can find that here for the blue just a little tiny bit. You could get away with that one in full motion, but probably just to be good to be aware of it, but not this one. This one feels like we dug down into soft dirt or sand or something like that. So, and that's a product of how you achieve the pose. Okay. How much rotation on the hips? A decent amount. And we can see the hip traveling backward and forward here from the side as well because of that. We didn't talk about, by the way, we didn't talk about doing this in the hips for all of these steps. And that's for a reason, because if I told you guys like to treat this like a nose and have it bobbing up and down per step, then when we go to the full body, your whole upper body would be bouncing back and forth by default. And I think that's just kind of wrong to do. In addition, the reason why I wouldn't do that, because even if you do want to have the pelvis rotating back or rotating forward per step, there are better ways to achieve it for the rigs that we're going to show. This is the primary mover control, which I almost always try to keep fairly upright in general. But there will be another controller which kind of makes the character do the hula just below this, which swivels the hips outward and can create more of the spine bending effect. And it's a lot safer to use that one for rotating the hips forward and backward, left and right, because it doesn't upset the balance of the upper body. It doesn't offset that in any way. So we'll go over that. There are times when I definitely do rotate this. I think side to side is a pretty good one, and especially rotating side to side is especially good to do on this controller. But there are other kinds of actions that we'll do on that hula controller, that hips control, such as the forward backward rotating, which I didn't mention at all on purpose. This looks solid. Very good. Just lots of little subtle things, lots of little nitpicks to solve. All right. Thank you, Sasha. And then we've got Susie. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. Looks solid on the primary controller moving backward at the same rate. We're locked right into the middle of the grid. And claps virtually, yeah. Can you guys put emotes in chat? Little claps in the chat. It looks like we've generally got it working. It's a little clunky. And clunky is usually a product of you did everything right by the book, but weren't able to polish it to look smooth. Oh, there you go. Chat's blowing up now. So I'm expecting that most of these poses will probably look fine, and that it's just going to be graph editor and polishing stuff. Okay. Yeah, I mean, they do look by the book, I think. Maybe this is a bit too far forward. When I played this back, it did kind of look like trudging. Or actually, now that I'm playing it back, it looks like just that one pose bops it forward a little bit. A little too far each time. So the up pose, keep it a little further back. When you're outrunning the supporting leg like that, like going further than it could support, we are definitely falling over at that point, but it's okay for a walk to be falling over. I just think that was a bit too far in space, and it looked like it was the only one doing that, so just be careful. This contact looks a bit weak, and I think it looks a bit weak because this leg is so bent. Let me check. Yeah, you're not using stretch in here, so it is the positioning of the leg. Oh, I guess this contact, yeah, is a little bit weak as well. We want to try to get that to almost straight because we're reaching with that leg. Now, I was just widening the stance a lot by doing that. Instead, we can just lift this up to where that just straightens out. And I would probably bend this ball roll a little bit more so that we're achieving that. I can see, though, the way that you're achieving this contact pose is by rotating the diamond rather than using the heel roll channel. So the reason we leave this completely flat is so that it's easy to have it interact with the ground in a complex way. So we've got all these channels, ball roll, toe roll to pivot off the toe, and heel roll to pivot off the heel, so that we can have a nice flat, consistent contact with the ground. So if I zero out your rotation here, and just make sure that it is still contacting the ground, which it is, I would achieve that pose by using heel roll and a little bit of, not toe roll, toe, sorry, and a little bit of toe to get some flexibility in the foot, whichever direction we're going. I think it was this direction. And then positioning it wherever it needs to go. In this case, though, I think it was lifting the hips just a bit. And maybe even backwards. Yeah, backwards a little bit. So that started to solve this problem and this problem. Now, I had said on frame 1, we don't want to move the hips backwards because that'll mess up our cycling. So instead, what that means is I would move both the legs forward. Okay, both the legs forward to get that nice relaxed pose. That unfortunately means we got to go propagate that through all the other poses because now they start at a fundamentally different place. So food for thought for the future, right? You can, though, now that you've got the cycling done correctly, if you did move these hips back this much or something, and then went to the very end and also moved these hips back that much to match, your cycling would still work completely perfectly. So now that you've got the cycling, you don't have to follow that same rule. If you want to fix it by moving these hips backward and up a little bit and then mirror that on your last pose, it's not going to harm anything. You're going to be completely fine. Okay, nice flat foot, staying flat, bending upward. This one didn't do anything. So here, the red foot is what I'm looking at. Between our up pose and our contact pose, it didn't move, and locking things in space should be done only with intention, right? So that what that foot is doing is it's pushing our body forward to be caught. It's going to lose all of its supporting weight and be pulled off the ground in the next couple moments. So it needs to be transitioning the whole time. I would say by the passing pose, I tend to put in just a little bit of ball roll. Then by the up pose, a significant amount of ball roll, but not so much as is going to happen on 15 on our contact, so that we have a progression. So this would be the most bent before it peels off the ground. This would be a little bit less. This would be a lot less, but not zero. This would be zero. It could honestly be zero, though, between these two. If you want the foot to have really solid contact and just stick for that amount of time, that's also okay. Okay. So yeah, don't leave it completely frozen for an amount of time. That's going to stand out. And then, like I've been telling other people, rather than pulling this into space for the down pose, leave it where it was and use toe roll to pivot it off the ground, and then pull it into space for the passing pose where this is correct. Okay. You might be too far up in the air here. This is a very, very extreme kind of pose, a really cartoony kind of pose. You might want to bring it down to be a little bit more subtle, and then also the amount of space that we are in front of our foot, like I was saying before. Bring that back a little bit. Relax this down, maybe just a little bit more, so that we're not like horse stepping. Horse stepping is when you pull your legs way up in the air when you're taking your steps, which can be cool for a character thing, but we're going for neutral here. Do be careful about those knees. I'm just noticing that the knees are a little too close to the legs. These represent the angle that the knee is going to face. And if we're that close, right to here where we almost touch, we're getting really close to the place where the leg is going to flip, right? So float these out comfortably in front of the body if we're just using them. If we're not using them, really, we're not using them in this hardly at all. We didn't move them back and forth to adjust the way that we're taking those steps, which is another layer of subtlety and detail that we can add in, but just keep those a little bit further away from the leg. Side-to-side range of motion for the hips feels pretty good, but I'm not seeing any rotation side to side. I'm seeing this one, and that actually looks pretty good too, but I don't see any of this, and we should get a little bit of that at least. Probably as much as I'm demonstrating here. Let me see how much I'm rotating, like 5 degrees or less, right, in that direction as well. A little bit, because you take a look at that, now that I've pointed it out and we've got this flat straight line to look at, it's like this character is carrying a tray of something or what have you, is balancing something with their upper body in a very careful way, is what the kind of feeling is. It just doesn't feel casual and relaxed and alive. Okay. All right. Hopefully that's enough feedback. I kind of lost track from all of them, what things I'd covered and what I hadn't, but good job in general. Of course, the first walking pass is going to be a little bit rough, and that's why we did it for waist down only, so that we could practice this. If anyone else has things that they've put in here since I started, point that out to me now, or we're going to move on and do our next thing. All good? Oh, Christina did? Okay. I'll go ahead and download yours. I did see yours earlier in the week, Christina. And then this one should probably be a little bit further. Let me go ahead and sort that into my correct folder so that I can take a look at it. There we go. And I'll open it up. Oops, dismiss that. Sorry, I have lots and lots of windows open since I'm doing this from home today. All right, cool. Let's focus on the perspective view. You have a decidedly feminine gait here, which I don't remember when I saw it earlier. So this looks extremely feminine. So we do need to tone that down a bit. Did you do the cycling trick? Yes, you did. Very good. I'm going to unmute this so that I can get it on the spot. Okay. Hopefully, by now, since I've gone over it a few times, we can tell what is making that feel feminine. But I think it's a combination of two things. One, your feet are stepping over each other rather than being side by side. So they're overlapping too much, and that makes it feel more feminine. The other part, I think, is the amount of rotation side to side is enough that it looks like we're popping the hips up into the air, and that makes it feel more feminine also. I will say, if we were going to animate a really feminine walk like this where the feet are crossing over or overlapping, we're not going to step through the ankles like that. On our passing, we're going to bring that out and probably angle it this way so that they can sweep past each other more elegantly rather than just stepping straight through. So be careful about that. If I wanted to alter that, I would do it in the graph editor. So this is the translate X. Yeah, translate X direction. Oh, it looks like they never actually move off of that. They kind of should. Generally, I know that's not something I covered, but they kind of should. So what I'm going to do is slide this whole thing, this whole channel, up or down, whichever way I need to go to get it off that center. So let's go ahead and movement tool. And by doing it this way, I alter the entire animation all at once. I'm trying to do this in a way you guys can see. I would just be on my other screen. So right here to where the toe touches that center line, that tends to be fine. Then I'm going to grab this one and do the same thing. So translate X all by itself. Zoom out a little bit so I have more room to move. Move it to where the toe just starts to touch that center line. And so there we're back to a slightly more neutral walk now. And then for the rotation, that is the Z rotation. Notice the way that I check this is just by grabbing it and having a manipulator tell me. You don't have to guess. You don't have to memorize. You can always just have the manipulator tell you, which direction is that? Use the movement tool. Oh, it's X because that's the red one. Which rotate is that? I use the rotate tool. Oh, it's blue. So that's the, it's Z. This one, okay. So we've got a nice clean line here. A little bit offset oddly. I don't think the extreme should be over here. It should probably be on 15 if that's the way you're going to do it. But it's just too extreme. So I would, in this case, scale it down to maybe something like that. That's an extreme of like 4 units. And now if I play it back, I think we're getting better now. But I'm going to undo all of that stuff so that I can see what you posed instead. That's just how I would solve those problems myself. I am seeing a lot of jitteriness in the playback. So the very first thing I would focus on in a walk is the hips. So we should see the hips bobbing up and down and swiveling side to side. And it should be a smooth playback. And if there's a problem there, it's going to propagate down through the legs. So let's check that first. Oh boy. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Okay, so this translate X, I think, is a pretty big offender. We can see that everything has been set to like flat tangents, which is not going to be appropriate for most curves, right? Our extremes should be flat tangents. These ones could be almost anything else. I think that the safe option, plateau tangents, is a safe option because when you approach a plateau, they become flat. But when you're not on a plateau, they're angled. So I think they're just kind of the better version of the default tangent. So if I grab this whole thing and hit plateau, Maya's not smart enough to know that we're trying to cycle here, so it's not doing anything with those, but the rest of them are generally okay. Then if I'm in here anyway and I'm editing, I find that if I've got all of these points and they're not really doing anything, you could get rid of them entirely, or if you want to maintain a little bit of control, leave the one in the middle, and then, whoops, I'm still on the scale tool. And then you could decide how curvy or how straight your interpolation is just by having that middle position there. So I'm going to get rid of those. And then here, this is where it would be cycling. So just like we showed before, I'll go ahead and maximize this so we can see post-infinity cycle, pre-infinity cycle. We can see that that line has now a hiccup in it. And if it's perfectly symmetrical like this, we can do my trick where I grab both of the same sides and move them together. But if you can't do that, you can always just position one and then position the other so that they travel smoothly through. So something more like this for translate X. So let's take a look. So that would be this direction is the one that I fixed. Okay. So we've got some things happening in translate Z, it looks like, and maybe in translate Y as well. So we got to look through all three. Oops, where'd my graph editor go? There we go. Translate Y is a significant one. We want to always make sure this one looks good because it's the most obvious one where we're bobbing up and down. Something weird about how you're posing your character. In frame one, this is a contact, which should be neutral. And then our next pose is down, but it didn't go down. So let's see. Yeah, it just kind of slid across. So it should be going down. Our passing pose can be relatively neutral. It doesn't have to be perfectly neutral, and this one isn't, so it doesn't really matter. That's okay. And then you've got your up position correctly going up. So I think we're missing the downs on this. This does look really, really crunched up, though. Like visually, on frame 4, it looks like if I made this go further down, we're really doing some weird like dance move thing at that point. So that suggests to me that your contacts were not raised up high enough. So if I raise the contact, that looks more comfortable. And on the graph, well, because I don't have auto key on, let's do it with the graph then. On the graph, let's get translate Y. I'm going to move this up here so we can see. If I move this up, yeah. So right to where it flattens out. And it's more in line with where your passing poses are. So your first contact definitely needs to be moved up. Actually, I can see your last one, it was up, and maybe it inadvertently got moved. So now if I just move this to the place where it mirrors that one, or we could copy paste that value, now it's going to cycle better just in general. So contact down, pass, probably could be lifted up as well. I think it's because this foot is not reaching, not helping it reach at all. And we're a little bit too far forward, which would be the translate Z. So that's a different thing. But we could be higher up with this one as well. Something more towards 0. Our up pose, we're still very far forward. Here's our contact looking more correct. Down, pass, up, down. Okay, so more like this. Then we want the peaks and valleys to be flat so that we're not hitting those and bouncing off violently. We're easing into and easing out of those poses. And then whatever the rest of these ones are doing, we just want them to flow smoothly in and out. So plateau tangents are what I tend to pick for just converting everything. And then remembering that my starting and ending positions need to flow. You could just do linear for that as a very quick solution if I'm working very fast. Setting those to linear will get me by. It's not the best, but it will do the job. And then you can adjust these if you want more ease like that, or if you want less, then leave it more flat like how it was. I tend to find that flat is generally fine for this. We don't need it bouncing dynamically up and down. Okay, so we're getting there. Now, though, is that translate Z stuff that was happening, and that was a mess. So let's take a look at that. So what's going on here is I think you're trying to adjust your posing too much, probably. Because at the end of the day, we could just do this, and it would kind of float forward weightlessly. It would be fine-ish, but it lacks character. So rather than doing that, let's just address the problems we've got here. This is one problem. That in the middle of this line is always moving forward. This is the progression of the character. If this flattens out, your character's stopped in space for a minute. Don't do that. So unless they're doing something very character-driven like a sneak, we're not going to do that. So we could use default tangents for this, just to get everything flowing straight. Plateau tangents would be fine. There are no plateaus, but I think default tangents for this one. And then the more you depart from the straight line that would connect these, the more forward and backward bumping you're getting in your walk. So these should all be very near to on that line and slightly move forward and slightly move backward, but not a whole lot. So when I hit play, we've got a pretty significant amount of forward-backward motion here, which is creating a very weird effect. And you're departing too much from that flat diagonal that we should be on. Let me look at poses and see if I can identify where it's happening. This looks fine. If anything, I'd say this is a little far back rather than far forward. This one seems fine. That one seems fine, but not high enough, so that has nothing to do with the forward back. That one seems way too far forward. So if we slide that back, let me do it in the graph editor so we can see how much that would be. Yeah, and it's bringing it back, kind of as I predicted, back onto this line when I do that. This contact seems okay. Down seems okay. Passing seems maybe a little bit too far. Actually, I was going to say too far backward, but I think it's more because this foot is messing with me. I need that to start to flex. And this one should be passing, so a little bit further forward. But we'll stick to the translate Z. I guess that's fine. And then this one, I think it was just that one seemed like the worst. This one, when I look at the graph, would be holding us back too long. So I suppose this one needs to go further forward. Ah, okay. Yeah, now I see. It is hanging out back too far. It's like the weight is still on the back foot. So that needed to be in line with like the heel or so of the front foot. Then this one can move a little further forward, like over the balls of the toes. And then this one could be even further forward than it was, something like that. It looks like maybe our start and end poses are not matching. Oh, they do match, just not in rotation. So where's this big hiccup that I'm seeing? I saw big. I think, yeah, it's just the rotation, but it's really messing with me visually to thinking that there's a problem with Translate Z. So remember, the bumpier that this is, the more off of the normal you're going. So do it very subtly. I would even say, for me, if I was going to fix this, I'd come back in here and delete all these and make sure that these are just linear, which they are. Then I'd go back to each moment and rekey Translate Z on this line. So I'm going to go for each step. I'm not hitting S because I don't know what other channels I've messed with or deleted or whatnot, but I go through each of my major key poses. And so now I've got all of the keyframes I need to do the adjustments, and I can do them a lot more carefully. So I can decide, here's my down pose. Do I want this to lean over the front foot or not? Okay. Then here's my passing pose. Do I want this to continue leaning forward or not? Sure, we can have it continue to lean forward. Here's my up pose. I'm going to move it forward just a tiny amount, so I'm coming back down to the neutral contact pose, which I wouldn't change at all. And then I could do it again. This one seems way too far forward. Oh, it's the back leg. Okay, the back leg is the thing that's messing with me. That needed to have peeled up already. So do I want to have my down pose over my front foot? I could just a little bit. Do I want my passing pose to be further forward? I could have it just a little bit more. And my up pose, I could bring it up just a tiny bit. So now I've got two bumps, bump, bump in my walk. And so if I put my mouse over here, you can see it bonk, bonk against that mouse very, very slightly. Okay, but not very much in this. If that, like I said, if this was completely smooth, that would also be pretty much fine for a cycle. Okay. Let me see if there's any problems with the feet other than what I've already mentioned. Do use toe to create some overlapping action with those as well. I already mentioned how we should pivot off the ground with toe roll for several of us, and instead of pulling it into the air already. Will this ever get easier? Yeah, practice makes perfect. I will say, like, here's the good news is, of course, this will get easier. Practice makes perfect as you get more familiar. Yeah. The bad news is, on average, it takes several years. It will take 5 years or something like that to get completely competent and completely comfortable with doing this. Where it took me several years, right, outside of school, of personal practice, of doing small projects and working with other people and doing commercial jobs. Animation is not easy. It's one of the hardest arts that you could have possibly picked, and one of the most work-intensive arts that you could possibly pick. When I described to the other people attending the school who are not animators what I did, they looked horrified every time. What do you mean you have to draw it that many times per second? What do you mean you have to pose it that many frames just to get 1 second of animation? What do you mean it uses math and graphs? Are you crazy? Just be a graphic designer or a photographer, right? So don't be frustrated by the fact that it's difficult. That's normal, right? If you don't enjoy it, there are lots of other things to do. But for a lot of us, this obsession is enjoyment. I kind of like going through all these little details and nuances and fiddling with them and perfecting them and finding out why they work, because I'm kind of crazy, and you probably are too, right? If you're choosing animation, you're probably a little bit crazy. Okay? So don't be too frustrated by the fact that it looks janky. Janky lasts longer than any other problem. It will continue to look janky for a long time. And that subtlety, that smoothness, that quality of elegance is something you have to fight and fight and fight and fight to get. Okay, so here we had from the contact to the down, the red foot did nothing. So just like I was talking about with Suji, make sure that this is transitioning to the next one. In this case, the next one should be toe roll off the ground, almost no ball roll. So this would be the last moment before we peel off the ground, and then we're in midair. Okay, just fine here. Let's see the placing the foot down. So also with the foot being placed down on the ground here, you're doing it right, but we need a little bit more dynamic snapping down to the ground. So frame 2, get us to 0 heel roll and a little bit of toe sticking up. And by frame 3, flatten it all out. Just tends to look a little bit nicer. We're sinking down to the ground between 4 and 7. What's going on there? Let's see. Oh, translate Y has been animated to negative. There we go. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, be careful about that. And we're missing a pose. Are we missing a pose? Yeah, we are. So the red foot doesn't have a pose at all on frame 11, and it should. So make sure that you reintroduce that as well. You're never going to get quality in the first try, Christina. Bad news. Never. I've been doing this for a decade, and I never get quality in the first try. Animation is a revision-heavy art. It is not a plan it out, execute it perfectly kind of art. And it's not the kind that we can feel our way through from the beginning and get good results. Like, I think some kinds of sculpting and some kinds of painting are like that, where you can kind of just slap things around and figure out what's going to work as you work. Animation is not like that. Animation is make a plan, figure out how to execute it. Then when you do, problems happen and must be fixed. And that is just normal. Your plan will be imperfect. The thing that you pose from the start will look bad for some reason. Figuring out those answers is where the real work begins, right? Why does it look bad? Why does it look awkward? Why does this character suddenly look like they've got to go potty? You know, when I didn't intend that. Why does this character suddenly look like they weigh 100 pounds more than I wanted them to, right? Yeah, and the experience that you need is going to be doled out over years, right? I want to stop making these avoidable mistakes. Yeah, we'll learn to do it all correctly, and it will still look weird. That's the thing about animation, is that it can be really frustrating because there's so much subtlety. There's so many little things that can detrimentally affect the performance, right? And so we've got to not only learn how to do the basic kind of stuff correctly, then we've got this whole layer of nuance that also needs to be added on before it looks elegant, before it looks alive, before it looks real. So try not to be too frustrated by the fact that that process is slow, and your work right now does not need to look beautiful because that is asking too much. It just needs to look competent right now. So we're not aiming for this super alive, elegant beauty. That will come in time. How do I keep track of so many things? I have no life, is how, right? This has been my life for more than a decade, is how. I've done it so many times that I could do it in my sleep at this point. How should you keep track of it? Take notes. I got shelves full of notepads over to my left. If I count them, because I'm sitting in front of them, I can count them right now. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 sketch pads that are filled with notes and drawings that I can see. And I know that's not all of them. Okay? Spiral bound, hard bound, pocket ones, moleskins, 19 that I can see. Oh, sorry, 20, because there's a really big one on my bottom shelf that I always forget to count. 20 notepads that I can see. And if you look through them, they're filled with a combination of drawings and notes and math and advice and links and whatever, right? Because they were my constant companion all through school. I took them everywhere. I wrote down everything in them, like a diary, really. And it took a hell of a long time. And I keep them as that reminder. Sometimes I bring them into class as that reminder and just drop this giant pile down on the desk to say, look, here it is. This is the kind of volume of work we're talking about. It's normal, right? It's normal to have to work that hard. So don't get distressed by the fact that you're not getting it right away. That's also normal. Okay, I got sidetracked. I don't know what I was focusing on anymore. Does recording the lecture help? Sure. Feel free. Yeah, you can always record the lectures. I've already given you and anyone else permission. Record what I say, write the notes down. Honestly, though, I would prefer to write my own notes than record a lecture, because that's me consciously making a connection and noting it down for myself. That's me internalizing. So even if I had the option to have everything recorded, I would still write my own notes and not type my notes, write them with a pencil in a sketchbook, because I can write in my own shorthand faster that way. I can doodle diagrams that way. It becomes a part of my brain that way. And the weird thing is now, when I go back to my sketchbooks and I open a random one to a random page and I see what's on that page, I'm transported back to the time that I did that in a way that it's weird, right? I remember roughly where I was or in what classroom or in what company. I remember roughly what I was thinking because it's all there on the page, just there for me. That's me talking to me. It's like another kind of living memory. It's so weird. So for me, even if I had the option to record, I would still write down my own notes as a way to solidify this stuff in my brain more. And I would write a hell of a lot more stuff like theories that I had. I think if I do this, it's going to look this way. And then I'd go try that stuff later. Or does this make a difference? So I'd write down things like, how much does it matter that this character's bobbing back and forth like this? And make a mental note to go do an experiment at some point. Like when this walk is done, increase that amount and watch it play back to kind of get an idea of how much it actually mattered that that existed in the first place, or crossing the feet over, or making them wide. I did so many weird little experiments just to see why something mattered. And you should do it too. And having a complete finished animation is a good opportunity to do that because you can make those edits really easily in the graph editor here by scaling up or scaling down or adjusting something side to side. We can do things like if I drop this whole thing down, the whole character is going to be in a squat position now throughout the whole walk, or lift it up and they'll be like in a stretch position for the whole walk. It can be fun stuff to do. All right. Do we have any other submissions that I have not seen in this folder? Because if not, I'm going to move on. Okay. I'm going to show you guys how to use Goon, the entire Goon rig now. So if you go into the resources folder, in number 6, we've got the Goon rig made by Sean Burgoon. I've never met him or talked to him. I just love the rig. It's a pretty old one by this point. It's nice and simple. I use it because it has a bare minimum of controls, but it has all the necessary controls. So it's got IK and FK switching. It's got facial control. It's got finger control. It's got some of my favorite finger control, honestly. I like how he did it. And it's a very bare bones rig other than that, kind of like a crash dummy. I think it's fantastic for students. And I'm going to show you how to use the entire thing to achieve full body poses. So you guys can go grab that there. I've got it saved in my folders already. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up the Goon rig. And by the way, I will eventually give you guys the rest of these. I've got Danny Norman. Norman is another rig. It's similar to Goon, but it's a lot more of a composite character, a complete character. And there was this period of time when everybody was decorating Norman differently to be male, female, young, old. So I'll give you guys a lot of these characters later. I have a baby proportioned Goon rig that I made last quarter that was used by Trinity extensively. Jesse Norman is another Norman. That's a female one. Norman Salesman and Sheriff are ones that I made. They're like black and white Mayberry characters from the 50s. Ultimate Beefy. It's like a muscle bodybuilder version of Goon. And then Walked Gender are 2 different Goons that are proportioned to look male and female and are posed to look like they're in a contact pose, male and female, which we can look at later. But I'm going to go ahead and just open up the rig so that we can explore all the features of this full rig. Or actually, since I'm streaming, and this is taking a long time, I'm going to take a quick break so that I can stop talking, get a drink of water, and then we'll come back and we'll explore Goon. I got to remember that this is also a class. All right, you guys. So if you want to ask questions in the chat or something, go ahead and type that in. When I come back, I can answer those things. But I'm going to go ahead and pause the lecture for 10 minutes and then come back and we can resume. And remember, if you guys can't be here, if you need to go to lunch or something, it's all being recorded. It's going to be available on YouTube as a recording afterward. So don't worry about that. I do want to just get through this faster so that I can stop entirely before I'll resume streaming at 4 p.m. for our next class. All right, so I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. We're going to be starting up again in just a minute here. Okay, welcome back. We're going to be taking a look at the Goon rig here, which you guys have in your resources folder as I showed. You can see he's a pretty plain looking crash dummy kind of guy with some very weird geometry that doesn't really look like muscle, which is probably for the best because he's like a doll. He's sort of, I think of him like that kind of stereotypical wooden posing doll that they sell in all the art craft stores that doesn't really achieve any of the poses that you want it to, but he kind of looks like the 3D character version of that. He's got some really good features though. He's fully capable of doing performance animation for the most part, even though he lacks a lot of the bells and whistles of like a full production rig. He's really good actually for what he is. And he's been used for years. I just tried to look up the original creator site doesn't seem to exist anymore. He's available on a lot of the aggregate sites where you can get lots of rigs. There's like spiritual successor rigs in Blender for him now. I don't know really what's going on, but this is a really solid one. It was used for quite a while. I maybe need to replace this eventually. I've thrown around the idea of making my own version of it because, of course, I do rigging professionally. But to do this much of a good job, I don't know if I'm up to it, and it would be a big challenge. So let's take a look at the controls for this guy and see how it is that we can achieve our poses in our animation for him. Some of this is going to be familiar, like we've got our bottom ring down here, just like we did for our other character, because our ball with legs was really just his legs with no upper body on it whatsoever. And now on that lower ring, we've got the ability to change all of these different scaling dimensions here. So if you grab 3 of them at once, you can scale up or down a piece of his body, so you can make your own kind of characters. Now, because of the geometry he's got, some of that looks better and some of that looks worse. It does also affect the bone length, so be aware of that. You are able to change the geometry. Like I've gone through and unlocked this geometry layer, and you can change the shape of this geometry as well to achieve a character because it's just being controlled by those bones for the most part. And that is a little dangerous to do, but it's how I was able to achieve a female character. I actually made this chest plate look like, breasts underneath that. Kind of a weird thing to do, but just so you're aware, you can do that stuff. It works with this character. The only place where I would be very cautious about would be his face, because there are facial controls that smoothly control his expressions, and changing that geometry would probably be pretty dangerous, although I'm not sure if I've tried it or not. It might be possible. Anyway, we've got that ground control, which is really just for positioning. Remember that we don't animate with that most of the time. And we've got our yellow triangle controller, which translates through space and rotates the whole upper body. And now when we rotate, we're going to see that the whole upper body follows along. Although the arms are stuck in space right now, and we'll talk about the difference between IK and FK controls in just a little bit. And if we move, the legs stay generally in the same spot on the ground. And we do have stretching, auto stretching turned on for all these limbs, which makes it a little bit more forgiving to move them around. Stretching of the torso I don't tend to use, but we do have a swash and stretch for the whole torso if you really wanted some cartoony animation to go on there. I was mentioning how there's oftentimes a second controller for control of the hips, and here it is. So this is the hula control is what I usually think of it as, or the hips FK control. And so what you can do is we can put in the kind of swivel or the kind of side-to-side bouncing motions that we would want for the hips without affecting the upper body. Okay, so we could leave this one relatively stable, having it move through space, and we could use this one for crunching of the body or for swiveling the hips back and forth or doing the hula or whatever. And it's a fun one to just like watch and do a little dance or something. So keep in mind that that's available. In general, if your character is tumbling through space, like they're going to run up walls or backflip or something like that, I would just use the yellow controller for that. So if they're going to run up along a wall and their whole body is going to be tilting in this way or something like that, we use the yellow controller because we get the entire upper body to do the right thing. If your character is going to be relatively stable on the ground and there are only subtleties that we need to animate, we're going to use this hula controller, this hips controller a little bit more. Okay. You can always do everything with the yellow controller. I just think that it's more of a pain to do that, and it's a nice thing to have a hips controller available. All right. Most of the leg stuff is going to be familiar to you already because that's what we were using exactly. So we've got the ability to move the legs through space using the diamond controller here. We do have a knee twist like we talked about before, which overrides what's happening with this pole vector, and the pole vector, which we can turn off. So now it doesn't do anything, or we can turn it back on. And now when I move this, we can see it reorienting itself towards the pole vector. We've also got all of the internal controls like we've done before. So heel pivot, which can go around and upside down as well. Ball roll, toe roll, toe, rock, and pivot. Okay. So learning when to use some of these, especially the more exotic ones like rock, is kind of up to you. Different animators will use them in different amounts, sometimes extensively, sometimes not at all, and prefer to just animate the foot using only the positioning and rotating controls. It's up to you to find when that suits your needs. I tend to think that if the foot is interacting with a surface, I would rather use these controls than to rotate it through space. And when it's not interacting with a surface, when it's up in the air and flopping around or whatever, then I ignore those controls almost entirely and use just the positioning and rotating controls for the diamond. Okay. Let me see if I have IKFK for the foot. I do. Okay, so here, if I turn the IK control off, do I immediately have no control? Yeah, I don't immediately have any control. I think that there are supposed to be forward kinematic controls that pop up, and I don't know where they are. I may have turned them off permanently for this version of Goon, but they were supposed to pop up here around the limbs, and then you'd be able to control them like a doll. I'm pretty sure that I did something to make that happen because on the arms, I think it still works. Let's see. Got this hand, IK weight. Maybe not. So it looks like maybe we're stuck with IK controls for everything, which is not really a bad thing, honestly. Oh, that's still even functioning, the volumetric squash and stretch. And it may be a product of the fact that this rig is kind of old. But typically, we'll have some sort of control over whether or not our arms and legs are being controlled this way, where we can position them in space, or more like we saw with the ball with the tail, where we bend one piece at a time and the effect is cumulative like that. A lot of times people prefer forward kinematic controls for arms. I was playing with the rig. You can check elbow movement. It seems to not work for me. Uh-oh. Is that true? Uh-oh. Okay, that would be pretty bad. Oh, it's just turned off. For the blue control, elbow pole vector, got to turn that to 1. And now that should function. Okay, so the defaults might be a little janky on this one. Let's see. Yeah, same thing. Both the arms, we've got to turn elbow PV to 1 before we use this, or the elbow pole vectors won't work. You do always have the option to use twist instead. It does exactly what the pole vectors do, just in a different way. So keep in mind, if you can't remember how to turn that back on, you do have that option there. Put this back in position, make sure the pole vectors are turned on, and auto stretch is turned on for all of them. So sometimes forward kinematic legs and arms can be helpful, especially if they're not interacting with anything. But I'd say it's much more common to just use IK for everything. You're fully capable of posing it however you prefer with either of them. But with IK in particular, we get a benefit that you don't get with forward kinematic, in that if my character was pushing up against the wall and needed to like interact with it, now it's stuck in position and I can actually make it appear that they're interacting solidly with the wall. So that's why IK tends to be my default choice. Okay. All right, so let's keep going with the body then. We've got these trunk controls here. You can see they're green around the center. If you grab one of them, you can see we only have rotates available. I would almost never recommend animating or posing your character like I'm doing right now, where I'm just grabbing one of the rings and then posing it, then grabbing another ring and then posing it, and then grabbing another ring and posing it. This is a great way to make your spine look broken. So instead, I almost always grab all three of these at the same time and then move them together to do whatever it is that I'm having my character do. Okay, so that they work as a unit. You'll see it looks a little disconnected right here at the bottom one with the waist. If you get the hips into the action, then it tends to fix that a little bit, or reduce the amount on just the first joint, and it will look somewhat connected again. You may notice, though, that as I'm doing this, the head and neck are staying oriented. They're not moving with the body. We have the option to allow or disallow that to orient itself with the chest piece. So right now it's not doing it. Here's the neck control right here. And the channel we're talking about is chest influence. So with chest influence set to 0, it remains upright. The reason you would want that is that it can be a little bit difficult to keep the head and neck feeling steady when you're doing repetitive motions or very dynamic motions like walks, for instance. And so leaving that influence off gives you the responsibility of making it appear to move with the rest of the body manually while leaving it more stable. But if we turn chest influence to 1, now whatever the chest does, the neck follows along like a child normally would. You can see the head has its own neck influence, which was turned on by default. If I turn that off, now the head is the thing remaining oriented, and it doesn't even matter if the neck moves, the head remains oriented upright. And that's another way that you can handle that problem. I hate it. So I leave neck influence turned to 1 so that we always have the neck and head as a unit, but the neck itself might not be connected to the chest 1-to-1. Ultimate Boney? I don't know who Ultimate Boney is. Would I say this rig operates similar to Ultimate Boney? I have no idea. This rig operates similar to most of the other rigs that I've used, though. I've used, at this point, dozens and dozens and dozens. And the controls do vary quite a bit from rig to rig, but not so much that they seem completely foreign. I'm going to reset the chest pieces back to 0 here, just so he's nice and upright. But in general, this character works very similar to a lot of other characters. Well, let's go up the neck then. We do have this neck controller, and it has stretch as well, if you need a little bit of that. But all it really does is rotate, and then our skull rotates from its pivot point right here as well. And we do have squash and stretch for the skull, which I think is very, very weird, and I do not like. There is a option in the skull that you need to be aware of, though, which is the eye follow. So over here, floating in front of the face, the yellow ring is the thing that will allow the eyes to look at it. And each one of the other two, the blue and the red, are the left and the right eye respectively. So this one, right? And now it will still follow, but it's following kind of, cockeyed like that. Or you can cross the eyes to a single point of convergence if you put them together like this, and then grab just the yellow. Then it's looking at something very up close, like a fly or something on his nose or something like that. But they're left apart, not converging just by default like that. And then there is a dilate control on each one of the two. So on the blue and the red, there's a lids control and a dilate. So the dilate can make him appear afraid, or I don't know what this would be, high or something like that, affected by drugs, I think, not necessarily like a cat, like dialed in. And then we've got upper lid, which can just open and shut, as well as lower lid, which can open and shut. And then just for a note of anatomy, make sure that you don't use the lower lid nearly as extensively as you use the upper lid, even though we're able to do this. Don't do that. The upper lid has much more of a dynamic range. I would say bring the upper lid down to about 0.7 and the lower lid to 0.3 is about the anatomical average that I would think about between those two lids. But you can use the lower lid for things like squinting or being paranoid or frightened, like that. Okay. So not a whole lot of dynamic motion in those lids. Like we can't shape them specifically, but you don't really need to shape them specifically for the most part. They just do the job of opening and closing. But more advanced rigs, full production or like movie quality rigs, will have lots of little shapers, and Goon doesn't have any of that stuff. Okay. These little cheek things here are more of a squint as well. You can move them around freely. They are limited. They don't move just anywhere. So you don't have to worry about breaking this rig entirely, which is why another reason why I like it so much. It doesn't move off the face. It just moves around. And it's got a puff control. So if you're puffing out your cheeks, then it's got a little bit of a puff control on the left and right as well. The jaw right down here will allow you to rotate, and you can see inside there is a tongue and some teeth, which I believe we have controls for somewhere. I'll find out in a second. So you can rotate pretty freely. You can also translate the jaw and move it around. This will start to break the rig because it's not limited in any direction. I would just say, in general, make sure that when you're making your character talk or pose their mouth, you're not predominantly translating, you're predominantly rotating, because that is more like how a jaw should behave. Now, if you want to add a little bit of both in, then yeah, absolutely, you can do that side to side for grinding kind of motion or rotating side to side. But be subtle about that if you're going to. When we do have the mouth open, those blocks inside become visible. Those are tongue controls, and you can wiggle them and move them around to achieve, phoneme shapes, or if they're sticking out their tongue or something like that. There are 3 of them. The back one controls the front 2, and I think it can completely come out of the mouth entirely. So just to make this a little bit more clear, I can do this out here. There are no other controls other than rotating and translating. Okay, but it flexes and moves the entire tongue. And if you need to do a little bit of animation with it to get like L shapes and phonemes, then you can do that. We'll stick it back in there. So just be aware that if you're dragging around this area, you're also selecting tongue controllers in there. It's not just a static thing. These 2 triangles on the left and right side of the face are the corner controls. So we can make them smile and go wide. We can push them together to get ooh shapes or pucker kind of shapes. You can see the geometry is not super detailed, but if it bothers you, then you can turn on the proxy geo layer so that you can interact with it. Grab the head and hit the number 3. Okay, yeah, there we go. It did it. And you'll get a much smoother rendering looking face. You can actually do this for everything. We could do it for the shoulders, for the arms, for the body, whatever. I don't bother doing that because really the only place it's going to matter for me is the face. But if you're going to render this guy, then I suppose doing it for the rest would be good. Let's turn that back to render again. And so now we'll get a smoother, nicer looking facial deformation than we had before. Okay. So you can smile and you can frown. Oops. Why was I still able to grab the geometry? Oh, I did the wrong layer. That's why. This one. My bad. Okay, so now I'm on the right one. So you can make them look afraid, right? Though this is not all the control we have for the mouth. Down in the jaw, there are many, many different controllers down here, same as we had for the feet. And these are pretty important to make note of. Mouth up, down will adjust the vertical position of the entire mouth. And left, right, same thing. It'll squeeze it to the left and the right side. Be careful about the teeth sticking out. We can adjust the teeth to be higher or lower for certain facial expressions, both the lower and upper teeth. So if we wanted something very particular, I think I have needed to use those occasionally, though generally you could leave those alone. And then the lip controls. So we've got upper lip center curl, lower lip center curl. So if we're making an ooh shape, right upper lip snarl, middle upper lip snarl, left, and then the same thing for all the lower parts of the lips. This is surprisingly useful for getting facial expressions. You can go quite a ways by just doing these controls, these up, down, and curling in and out, plus these corners. And you can get a pretty wide variety of facial expressions. I encourage you to play with that and see what kind of facial expressions you can achieve. Go for something specific and try to make it happen. Keep in mind with the jaw closed, the lips interact much more closely, and so that will change the way that your facial expressions appear. But if we did something like this and now use the curl, right, we get a much more like kind of kissy face that way. By doing all that stuff together. Okay, so keep in mind all this stuff interacts. It's kind of complex, but as far as like phoneme shapes and lip sync, it's more than sufficient. We can make it happen. Up here at the top, we've got eyebrow controls. The center one, up and down, quite a ways, right? Pretty big distance, although it is limited eventually. And scrunch, so we can make it squeeze towards the center as well. All of these different controls work the same way. They only move up and down, and the rest of them don't have any internal controls at all. So by pushing these one by one carefully, right, we can kind of affect some pretty nice facial expressions. We can scrunch this or not, right, making him look a little bit concerned at that point. And if we decided we could open or close these kind of cheek shapes to make him appear to squint. And finally, we have the lids way back over here. So I could close this one a little bit like that, and maybe both the upper lids a little bit. Maybe not. But we could get, a nice facial kind of shaping out of all of that. His ears don't have any controls to them. And so that's it for his face. Can take a little bit of getting used to, but it's fun to play with. Moving on to the rest of the body. So we've done the trunk, we did the legs already pretty extensively. So we're down to the arms. We've got these two controllers here for the shoulder shrug. So here it will move that little ball around, and you can see a little bit of the chest geometry is attached to it as well. So be sure that you're using those when you're posing the arms, because if you don't, it's going to look very wrong. One point of anatomical accuracy that I'll point out: your arms aren't really capable of reaching even this high without the use of your clavicle and scapula. If you try it, so if you put your arms down and you position one of your hands strongly over your other scapula and then try to raise your arm up, you can probably only get, without using your scapula at all, about this high up from a relaxed pose. Any higher than that, and you start to have to engage the clavicle and scapula to reach upward. And so one of the pet peeves that I'll have is if you're doing something like this, reaching up with your character's arm for like a shelf or something like that, and this has not been moved, you're doing it wrong. Okay? That clavicle needs to be up here, right, already, for us to be able to raise that high. And if you're trying to go touch the top of your head, right, like that, and this has not been moved beyond its default over here, you're definitely doing it wrong. This needs to be way up here, way higher to reach high above your head. Maybe not that high. I think I just went too far. But also the mobility front and back. Now see, looking from this angle, look how weird that looks. That's because to reach in that position, this clavicle needs to be helping me to reach back. And we also have to engage the pull vector for the direction that this arm is reaching as well. Even if we're reaching with our elbow forward, having this clavicle pinch back a little bit makes it appear more anatomically stable. He's doing the Macarena. Yeah, very, very slowly doing the Macarena. So keep that shoulder in mind when you're posing your arms. It needs to work in concert with the way that the arm is reaching around the body, or it will look very, very inaccurate very quickly. Okay. The hand and arm controls, let's see, pull vector doesn't have any controls, except the way I want you to think about the pull vector is it's the direction that the arm is reaching. And imagine an invisible line between the shoulder and the wrist. If you cross that line, that's when this flips. Okay. Arm flipping direction problems is a big thing for people who are first starting to pose IK arms and legs. So just know that that invisible line, that is the pivot area. And so if this is too close to the body, that's where the problem will manifest. So in general, swing this around in a big arc around that shoulder wrist area and keep it off to one side in order to properly orient it. The hand, we've got an elbow twist and PV just like we were talking about, as well as an auto stretch. I don't actually see a stretch control here. I think it's in the back of the hand controller. Yeah, right here. So if you get elbow popping problems or you need to scale your arms, then that is in this hand controller, which is quite complex and it's got a lot of control in it. So let's do the diamond first. Keep in mind when you're posing an IK arm that the position and rotation don't affect each other, right? They're completely independent. So you have to be continually aware that your wrist might feel broken or like it's being detached depending on how you're posing your character. You go too far like this, and suddenly it feels like your hand is ripping itself off or something like that. So you have to keep that oriented properly with the arm so that it feels like it's still attached nicely. Some rigs have the ability for that hand to remain in line with the forearm instead of doing it this way. I kind of like it this way. I prefer to have more responsibility and less happening automatically in general. But it's a preference, and other animators might prefer it to stay in line with the forearm more. So then we come to this one, the little hand controller. I'm going to move this just off over here so it's floating in space so we can see it nice and clearly. The back of the hand controller here doesn't move at all. It has many, many different channels, mostly for fingers in here. So we do have the IK weight, which since we don't have forward kinematic controls available, don't touch that one. We've got stretch and volumetric stretch available. And then we've got all of these different categories here. So the gray denotes when there's a new category or a new finger. This little gray dot here, because those are locked. This first one are general big changes that you can do to your hand shape. And then we've got individual finger controls. Index, middle, ring, little, and thumb down at the bottom here. Okay. So first, for the master grip, what that means is bending all the fingers forward and back. And keep in mind, you can bend them backwards as well, where it'll look very broken. So if you want a character breaking their fingers, that you can do that. I don't think there's any limit either. So they can continue going through the palm all the way out the other side. So have a care about how you might use this, and I think that's true for all the controls, that they won't just stop where it makes sense for them to stop, right about like there, or maybe even here might be a maximum grip amount or something. And because this is a general control, it's controlling all of the fingers all together, all the joints of all the fingers, and it's not changing these channels at all. So using these master controls in conjunction with the individual finger controls is just fine, so long as you realize you're doing that. We could use a little bit of master grip to like relax the hand, and then individually come in and fine tune what each of the fingers is doing to give it a little bit more life. So here I'm using the base, middle, and tip controls for individual fingers to offset what the master grip was doing. Oops, getting lost there. There we go. So now I've got kind of a cascade of fingers that was started with master grip but finished with the finger controls. And if I continue using master grip, now that cascade is held because each one of the fingers has a little bit different bend, which can be nice as well. can give you a lot of shortcut animation solutions for subtle action. Let's bring that back to 0. Wow, I did a lot. Okay, I'm just going to type in 0. There we go. Master spread. Yeah, master cup is great too. Yeah. Master spread is the in and out, and again, it doesn't limit itself, so be careful. Pushing the master spread in just a little bit can feel a lot more relaxed than leaving it at 0. Okay, at 0, it feels very mechanical, very straight. And then spreading it out all the way to around 50 or so, maybe less, can feel fine. Master cup is where we splay the fingers. So having a little bit of that can be really nice. Keep in mind for master cup, it only affects the first joint. It doesn't bend the whole finger. So grip and cup together can get us some nice, pretty subtle feeling finger positions. But we always finish that stuff out with the individual fingers. And then thumb grip is just the entire thumb bending in its direction of movement, which is towards the palm or away from the palm, because its orientation is slightly different. The only thing I don't like about this is that the last digit appears to have been by default in a slightly different position than the rest of them for some reason, because we get this hitchhiker thumb kind of thing happening very, very quickly if we move it open. So be aware of that, but generally just fine. Okay, so those are the master controls, and now below that, each finger has the first joint, so the base joint, the middle joint, and the last joint. Those 3. So it's got 1, 2, 3 joints on each one of them. Okay, so you can make their fingers look broken like this, or we could, let's see, what would I actually do? Maybe have the tip press back a little bit, like if we were pushing a button. I don't know why my base is going like that. We could put like a little bit of pressure on something if we had it bending this way and not look completely broken. Put some pressure on something like that. Then they all have spread, which is the same thing as the master spread. So it's the lateral motion that we didn't get, and roll, which can be useful for very specific hand poses. Although your fingers can't do that, your fingers and our organic hands are flexible enough that it appears like we're doing that sometimes. And I will say, like, even though index roll is kind of weird, using a little bit of it ends up making a lot of sense in particular cases, like where you're manipulating something very small. Okay, so don't completely eschew index roll or any of the rolls for any of these, because it can give you the ability to like pinch into a single point all of your fingers. If you go down this list, like spread, 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 and control them all at once. Somebody was a Trekkie probably, because when you control them all at once, it does that. These 2 go this way, these 2 go that way. Who knows? Maybe that was on purpose, maybe it wasn't. And if you go down through all of the rolls, or sorry, all of the base, middle, and tip for all of them, it's really pretty much the same as using the master control, except you can include the thumb also. So I wouldn't, in general, if you're going to do big positioning things, I would use the master control instead. Okay. So that should be everything we need to know about the Goon character controls in order to pose him the way that we want to. We've got control over whether or not his neck and head are following the body. Oh, did I show you guys how to stop him from looking at this control? I don't think I did. So right now, he's tracking this, and I think it's in the blue and the red. No, it's not. Okay, where is it then? I'm looking for eye influence. Maybe we can't turn that off anymore? I swore that there was a way for me to say that the eyes shouldn't follow that. But I'm not actually seeing it. Head, eye, follow? Oh, there it is. Thank you. So right here, if we turn that on, it means that this controller follows what the head does. So he won't have his eyes looking off into the distance somewhere. And then this is still capable of moving as a child. So we can have his eyes positioned upward no matter where the head is looking. So if your character is not interacting with something in the scene, it's probably better to turn that on, eye follow on this head controller here, so that his eyes are just kind of remaining centered and you can decide which way his eyes are darting and when. But if you need him to track something in the environment, then leave that off. And whether this is another character's face or an object that he's watching go by, the eyes will always attempt to look in that, and then you can worry about the body posing second. Okay. I'm going to see what happens if I grab everything and hit 0. Will it return to a good default position? Maybe. Yes. Yes, it did. Okay, good. A good rig will oftentimes do that. Sometimes rigs have a little bit of trouble, and that won't entirely work, where you hit 0 on everything and it returns back to a nice looking pose, but this one appears to. Okay. All right, so remember that you should be referencing. So you create a reference file, create reference, browse for your reference, put your rig in the same folder as your blank animation scene whenever you start your scene, because breaking a rig like this is as easy as hitting the delete key by accident, and you don't want that to happen when you're working on it. Our assignment is to get this character into 3 distinct attitude poses. If you want to tell a story with those poses, then I think that helps sometimes, but we really only need you to grab everything and hit S to key all on frame 1, on frame 2, and on frame 3, and pose your character doing 3 distinct attitude poses on those 3 frames. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and try to just do one as an example here, and then I'll answer questions, and then we'll basically be done with this one. And if you're in my later class, then I'll start streaming that one at 4 p.m. Okay, but I'll try to do an attitude pose here with this character for you as an example, just to show you the kind of amount of work that we would have to put in for something like that. Also, general piece of advice for doing your character attitude pose: it is really easy to go one of 2 directions. Too stiff and robotic is one side, and the other side is too melodramatic. Okay. If you want your character to not look too stiff and robotic, the very first thing you should do is lower his knees down. Oh, where did my knee controllers go? I think when I zeroed everything, they must have gone somewhere weird. Oh, here they are. There's the answer to something. Those are both blue. Oh no, they're both red. Okay. Oh no, they're not. It was all of the pole vectors for the arms and legs. Okay, so be careful about that. If you do hit 0 for everything, all of those pole vectors went to like the middle of the legs or something, or the middle of the feet. So be careful of that. Oh, and I've got them on the wrong side. Blue with the blue, red with the red. If you want your character to immediately not feel so stiff and robotic, first of all, drop them down just a little bit so that their knees and legs can bend a little bit. Without doing that, they're always going to appear weird. And get these feet off of this 90-degree angle almost instantly and spread them out just a little bit more. So even just standing upright, this character already feels a little bit better. And in general, keep the pole vectors in line with the toes unless you're doing something really specific. So now when I drop him down, we get one leg that looks like it's connected and one that looks like he's like rocking to one side for some reason. So in general, keep the pole vectors in line with the toes or somewhere near to in line with the toes, and you'll get better results that way. But that's one of the most stiff things about a character in T-pose is that they look like they're standing at a super hyper attention, hyper extended everything, and it looks awful. Okay. You are definitely going to need to bend the body if you want them to not appear to be completely stiff. Do it as a unit together. Think about posture. Okay. Don't ignore the shoulders. Okay? And don't be afraid to try to get the hands to interact with the body, like putting them on the hips and posing them appropriately, putting them on the head and posing them appropriately. This character doesn't have the ability to snap those body parts to the head or the hip or the chest. A lot of other rigs do. So if you have your character gripping their own chest or gripping their own hip, there's a switch that you can flip so that when that body part moves, that hand appears to stick to it, which is really great. Goon is simpler than that. He doesn't have that ability. So we kind of just have to animate those things together. Actually, I didn't check if there was chest influence. No. So we don't even have chest influence for these IKs, which sometimes is a feature as well. Okay. So I'm going to think about what sort of pose I want to try to put this guy in, or if you guys have a suggestion, you can type it in, and I'll do that. But some sort of emoting pose that I can try to put his whole body in, and including his face and including his eyes. Let's try, oh, by the way, one of the hardest things you can attempt is crossing your arms like angry. That can be one of the worst things. Luke says terrified. Okay. Terrified is already a pretty melodramatic feeling. The kind of thing we think of like screaming and fleeing and falling over backwards and stuff. I'm going to go for a more subtle scared or nervous or something like that, just because it's harder to do and it requires a lot more subtlety. So I'm going to make him like he suspects something is behind him and is working up the courage to look, where he just heard something behind him and is looking pretty scared about it. So body language wise, I'm definitely going to bend him down more than I would normally, and probably going to hunch his body over. Keep in mind, when you first do this, it's going to look really weird. He's going to be completely off balance like this. It's very likely that you have to reduce the amount of that first joint there. But I'm going to bend him over, and I'm going to twist him just a little bit. And I'm going to get this off of the even as well. I'm going to tilt this a little bit forward as well, and a little bit to the right. I think I'm going to move this back again. And we could also get, oops, sorry, the hula in there just a little bit if we wanted to. Maybe like that. I think about this kind of thing being protective, like being scared, being nervous. So I'm going to shrug the shoulders and bring the head down like this. And notice that my eyeballs have left the building. So I'm going to bring them back in front of the body. But I'm going to want him suspecting to look behind him. So I'm going to place them off to one side. What you might find is that you need to rotate this so that both of the targets are tangent to his head instead of like this where they're converging a lot more. You might end up losing one of the eyeballs that way. So be careful about it. But just for now, I'm going to position it just off to one side like that. I think I'm going to shrug his shoulders up and probably back a little bit too. Oh, they work not in tandem, but opposite each other. So good thing to keep in mind. So I'm going to shrug them back. Some of the controllers can get lost in the head or the geometry. Remember that you can hit 4 to see straight through the body to all of the controllers, and then hit 5 or 6 to bring it back to a full textured view of the character. Okay, so now what to do with the arms. I think that bringing them very close into the center of the body, and when I do it, I tend to bring them up in front of my chest, like here, like this, and maybe clenching the fingers or something. I also want to build in some asymmetry into this because perfect symmetry looks ugly and also unnatural. So I'm going to start building in some asymmetry here by maybe leaning the body to one side there. We can bring the elbows more reasonably in the direction that they need to be pointing. I might bring this closer out here, like we're trying to build a barrier between us and the scary thing behind us over here. So he's like moving the elbow up a little bit higher, and this hand is being held up a little bit higher, like that. Okay, so far so good. Need to find out what's going on with the legs. I think because we're cringing away in this direction, I'm going to rotate this leg out along with its knee, like that. And how am I going to position them? One of them would probably be the weight supporting leg. So at this point, I have to get up in my office and act this out a little bit to see what I'm doing. So actually the opposite, I found the opposite's true. The leg towards the direction where I would rotate is actually planted more flat, and the other leg is bent, and I've also got more of my weight on that other leg. So I'm going to undo that. I found that this one was planted straight. This one I rotated out and away, like this. And I also had my weight more over this leg than over that leg. Because we're posing these characters three-dimensionally, like fully three-dimensionally, you do have to rotate your camera quite a bit to see what the pose looks like from other positions, even though the camera is over here. This makes sense as long as your center of mass is somewhere between this point and this point, right? The balls of the feet, then we are definitely supporting our weight. As soon as we start to go over here, where we're fully over this foot, we're in a danger position where we're about to tip. And then as soon as we go past that, we are falling over entirely. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to move this a bit more and drop it a bit more to get a little bit more impact. Taking a look at this leg in line, I can definitely swivel this further over in this direction. Maybe rotate my hips a little bit more, and then I'll counter rotate this back again with the chest pieces. So getting a little contrapposto in there. By the way, don't try to get contrapposto by rotating the shoulders alone. I've seen that occasionally where someone will rotate the hips one direction and they'll try to take both of the shoulders and rotate them the other direction. That's not how that works. Use the spine. Okay. So spine, 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 and rotating it in this direction like he's taking a peek over there. Okay, we've lost the eyes a little bit, but we can do that in a second. I'm going to take both the arms and elbows and slide them over. Okay. Did I go too far? Yeah, probably. Okay, there we go. Not so far. And I even had this knee a little bit inside like that. There we go. Slightly wider stance feels better. Looking from this position, as he's bending over from the waist, and I didn't move the waist forward or backward, he's kind of tipping over his toes. He's tipping over the balls of his feet. And also we haven't given any thought to whether or not one of these feet is further forward or back. So I'm going to do my pose again in my office where I'm trying to act this out. I definitely have my supporting leg further behind me. So this one I have moved back here. Remember that if you move things with this little square, you're moving it with the two adjacent arrows. So this green one would push into and out of the ground. This green box slides it on the floor, which can help you to pose things a lot more quickly. So yeah, this one was definitely held behind my body a little bit more. Get the knee over there. And that will now allow me to slide his center of mass back a little bit more balanced here. So now his center of mass, maybe somewhere here in the chest, is directly in the middle, and we're not falling over. We'll take the hands and the elbows and move them back like that, closer, more protective into the body. and take a look at what's happening with the eyes. I'm going to go ahead and just rotate this, and then maybe move this one. So here's the thing. I kind of want to make these eyes not as converged. If I grab the translate X in the channel box, it's the one that moves it directly in and out of line. But if I do this with my manipulator, it's in world orientation and it ends up doing a lot of weird stuff. So for simple utility things like this, I might just grab the channel and slide it so that these eyes aren't converging as much. And now I have a better look on my character's eyes. So just keep that in mind. I think it's time to make a facial expression and oppose his fingers, and then to try to polish this up and see if we can make it feel complete. So definitely if he's looking worried, a lot of these are going to raise up. But I think that this side is going to be more worried, and this side is going to be more curious. Like this. But maybe that's not scared enough. But I do want it to cascade across his face. Like that. Feels okay. You can grab all the blue or all the red. And since they're locked vertically, you can slide them up and down. But look, if you slide them too far, they end up lining up flat again. Okay. So if you've got your pose, you can slide them up and down together like that. Remember that your eyebrows are connected. Even those controllers look kind of weird. The soft version of Goon here is a little bit more Play-Doh-like. So try not to make them feel completely disconnected when you pose them, but they can be different left and right, as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has taught us in his infinite wisdom. I'm going to keep the jaw mostly clenched. I think he would be like showing his teeth. So let's do all the upper and all the lower lips together. Yeah, a little bit wider, like that. Oops, that's the wrong side. So right is red. Another weird thing I see is like if you do grimace on both sides of the lips, you really got to bring the middle one up at least a little bit. Otherwise, it looks really silly. Let's reduce that one a little bit. And I get some dynamic posing on those teeth. Yeah, I can rotate them just a little bit to make the whole mouth sit slightly differently. I can even part the teeth just a little. Okay, too much left and right there. There we go. And this might be a time also to slide the teeth up and down, or the whole mouth. So we could show more lower gum by sliding that down, which looks a lot more helpless. And if I slide it up, it looks like more of a cringe, like an anticipation of pain kind of thing. So let's drop it a little bit down, I think. Left and right is funny as well. Ooh. Like he's whispering to someone when we do that. I'm not so sure about this Scoob or something like that. We'll do that. And then where was the teeth? There's the upper teeth and lower teeth. So you can also fully move the teeth to affect how this reads. So if you didn't want it to average the opening in the teeth higher when you move the mouth down, you could also move the teeth down a little bit like that. Just be aware that sometimes they'll start to stick out down here a little bit. I'm not going to do that in this case, though. Okay. Feels all right. More clench or less clench is the question. I think it's more intense with more clench. and it's less intense and more of a suspicion when it's open. That's the feeling I'm getting. If it was, what if it was very open? Where's his tongue? What the? Tongue? Are you down here by the feet? Because I zeroed out everything, tongue. Oh. Oh. Oh, hello. What are you doing up there? Tongue? That's not where you live. Apparently hitting 0 on everything is kind of a bad idea. Oh. How interesting. Here's the thing I really want to know. Is that tongue still following with the head? Or is it doing something else? Oh, no, it does. Okay. Very strange. So remember, if that happens to you, the tongue has a hierarchy. Only the backmost piece needs to move all of them. So I'm going to flip this back into the correct orientation and move it back into his mouth. So obviously the rig isn't perfect, but I still like it. And this could just be a product of age, since this this rig was made quite a long time ago. Might be nicer if I had object mode or object-oriented movement control at this point. I can just slide it straight back. Okay, as long as it's in there. I don't think I have to do anything with the tongue, but it was weird that it wasn't visible at all. But that said, like, if for some reason you don't want the tongue to do anything, that does mean you can just stick it up inside the skull back here and just let it not exist for a while. Okay, there we go. I'm going to turn this back to world orientation. I'm thinking, like, I moved this shoulder back, but would it maybe be more appropriate to move it forward? So again, I'm going to stand up and act this out for myself. Yes. Okay, I almost try to touch my ear with my shoulder when I do it. And I get my head a lot further oriented to the side as well. So I'm going to move this much further up here, take this elbow and drop it down closer to my body. Okay. Take my neck, bring it in closer. There we go. Starting to get that body language. So now I'm fiddling around with, should he be looking towards the ground or towards the ceiling or straight across? I think up anticipates something bigger than you, whereas down is like something gross or disgusting. So if we're going for fright and he hasn't seen what he's looking for, I'm going to put it more up, I think. I don't know why, but it feels like I need to drop this eye lower for it to feel appropriate looking in this direction. When it was up in its position, it didn't make sense to me. Yeah, he's looking pretty scared. Okay. Notice that the way that I work through this problem is from the biggest pieces first down to the smallest pieces. So the very first thing I'm concerned about is where the hips and are going and what the spine, the core of the body is doing, and then how they're interacting with the feet. So the feet are supporting the character on the ground, and whether or not we're balancing our character and what the body language is telling us with how we're positioning those feet. And then posing of the arms and then facial expression, and now finally finger expression. I think I'm going to move this slightly out. And now let's see, what would I do with the fingers? I think when I do it with my hands, I'm clenching my pinkies, and my pointer and thumb are a little bit more relaxed. So let's try that. I'm going to start with some master grip and a little bit of spread inward. Yeah, just a little inward spread, so they're clenching a bit closer. And then for cup, I'm going to set pinky closer and pointer further out. And then, yeah, I'm going to do about that much and then go individually. Okay, I don't like, there we go. I didn't like how far down the base went immediately. I'm going to work my way up, squeezing these fingers, but less as I go. Middle. About there is okay. I'll do a little bit of base. And index. Okay, so now I need thumb. And thumb is always a little bit weirder. I did something like that with my thumb, but now I'm looking at that and that looks bad. Yeah, I don't like that very much. Spread and roll, by the way, are very essential for the thumb in particular to get a nice pose. There we go. It's almost like I'm almost rubbing these two fingers together, but not quite. And just the thumb tip looks kind of weird. Another addition to the select the geometry and hit 3 solution might be the hands, because they do look pretty chunky unless you do that. You know what's weird? I actually like the chunky hands more. I'm going to just undo that. Yeah, I actually like the chunky hands more with their like weird little creases and stuff like that. Okay. Something that might make this feel more helpless is to bend these wrists down compared to the forearm. And if I wanted to make them feel more tense, then I'd probably bend the wrists up compared to the forearm. Oh, that's the one. That's the one. Okay. Keep in mind, we don't have any forearm bones here, any radius and ulna. So you really do just rotate the wrist controller to position the wrist. In some characters, it'll distribute that bend along the forearm. In this character, there's no point to it. But yeah, a little bit of up wrist really started to sell that. And I'm going to bend towards his face also. Sometimes, depending on the complexity of the character, you might want a camera that turns off all the controllers so that you don't have them distracting you. I think in Goon, they don't really bother me that much, but it definitely could be a pretty big distraction. Okay, this one, I think I'm going to have a slightly less clenched hand. Spread those fingers out a little bit more. Yeah, almost like this hand's ready to do something, and this one is in that protective kind of gripping action. Yeah, so if there's like a door or something behind him where he just heard something coming from the opposite side, that's what I'm thinking about. Or hallway where he suspected he heard something at the end of the hallway. Sort of what I'm going for here. Nah, so I wouldn't rock this unless he was just now stepping down onto something. So if he was tentatively stepping towards something, here we go. That would be what I'd be doing with that foot. But since I'm just staying static, I think I'm gonna continue to rotate this around. A little bit less. Yeah, it still feels okay. The fact that he's a very skinny guy. Probably in and out is what we would actually do to animate that. In one frame and then out together to make him feel like he's doing the knee knocking Scooby-Doo kind of scaredy animation. I didn't really do much with this hand, so I'm going to bend. Let's see if master grip. No, master grip's too general. I'm going to go through and just do mid and tip. And then I think I'm going to squeeze these fingers together a little bit more. So we'll bring those, and the middle. Not quite. That's about right. With this pointer finger extending out further. And so now he's like almost going to point at something. That's interesting. Yeah, okay. Maybe more like that. How many poses do we need? 3. And do we need to provide reference planning? You should do reference and planning, at least posing your whole body yourself, looking up images of an actor doing it in a movie or show, or stock photography. If you have it, I can help you to understand how better to achieve the pose that you found. If you don't have it, we just have to judge the pose that you make on its own merits. So whereas I was being very particular about that with the first few assignments, I'm going to ease off on it a little bit now. But I do think it is a very good idea to have reference almost all the time. Either that you create yourself or that you find. Should I do that? Does that make him feel more or less scared? That makes him feel less scared, I think. Yeah, legs together, more scared. Legs apart, less scared. So I'm fairly happy with that. But I'll also say that my ability to pose a character in a vacuum like this, where there's nothing else happening, and by that I mean no interaction with the environment and no other poses that I'm animating in and out, hurts my ability to do this job. I've found, and this is strange about just me, if I animate into and out of different poses, my poses get much better. And so even with figure drawing, if I was drawing the pose that they did before the pose that I'm drawing or after, I found that that pose got a lot stronger for me. And that's just particular to me, like the way I think. And I don't know what he's doing next necessarily right now, and I don't know what he just did. And so this pose is a little bit more generic, but I find that in an animation setting, they all get a lot stronger because there's that before and after moment, that intention that kind of helps. But there you go. I'd say that's close enough for what I'm looking for. It's balanced enough. I've got a good sense of body language. There's probably a lot more I could do, but I don't want to just go on forever with that. If I were going to tell a story with this, then I would probably do the next moments or several moments on, like this is a scared, I just heard something behind me kind of anticipation. Then I might do approaching and reaching out, or stealing yourself, like having a moment where he's thinking, I have to do this, like let's just get it over with kind of thing, and show that in his face and show that in his body language. And then maybe a reaction to whatever he sees, being disappointed or relieved or confused or something, would tell a nice 3-part story. On an animatic I'm working on, which will turn. Okay, yeah, base them on whatever you want, but reference means real life reference, right? Reference can mean drawings, right? That is your own and you create it, and that's good. But reference should always contain some real life thing. So you posing in front of a mirror to look at yourself, or with a camera, or some actor or some other living person posing as well, because that's where the reality, the sense of reality comes from, is something real. All right, you guys, hopefully that's enough for you to start on your assignment and get a lot of headway with it. If you have any questions, ask them now, or you can send them to me via email or use the discussion section of our class. But that's going to be it for me, and I'm going to end the stream in just a bit if I don't have any questions. Let's see. Thank you. Thank you. Just for fun, real quick, while I let people make up their mind if they're going to do that, I want to make his knees jiggle back and forth just because it's going to be fun. Oh, I changed the frame rate and accidentally didn't click this button here. So I got this partial frame. You can see that little dashed line there. So I'm going to undo back to before I did that. There we go. Click that. Now change it. Whoops. Okay, so this will be outward for both of those. We'll do it on 2s to see. Hey, that one's not doing anything. Full vector's turned on. What? Is one leg's pull? Oh. Well, that was weird. Okay, anyway. Oh, is it because I don't have auto key turned on? It's like freaked out. Huh, very odd. Okay, well, whatever. Oh, wait, I didn't move to... out. In, out. Okay, great. So now, in our graph editor, and remember, animating is not part of this assignment. I'm just doing this for fun. Going to cycle. Even on 2s, that's probably way too fast. But now I guess I could just slide this out. And it should still cycle. Yeah, something like that. All right, you guys, have a good day. For those of you in the later class, I will start streaming at 4 p.m. just like the normal start of the class. And these should be fully recorded on YouTube so that you can refer back to them if you need anything. Send me emails and ask questions that way. Zoinks! Yep. All right, you guys, have a good day, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.